have no idea where this will lead us, but I have a definite feeling it will be a place both wonderful and strange.
Hello, and welcome to the Wonderful and Strange Twin Peaks Logcast. I'm Kalil, and with me today is the Pete Dayton to my Fred Madison.
Oh, so I'm the most interesting part of the podcast.
You are the long, drawn-out part after I get the podcast started on a great note. Also, I spared you this time. I was the wife murderer, not you. You're just the other bad person.
Congratulations.
I'm trying to spare you. I'm the good guy by not making you the bad guy.
So, what do you want? Do you want me to thank myself? Me feel happy? Do you want me to make happy sounds? What do you want?
I want you to explain to the audience who you are.
I'm the Unplugged Professor.
Good.
And I am back inside this podcast to say hello to you all. I hope that you're going to enjoy some more fantastic Lost Highway shenanigans with us today, because we've got a list.
A list
of no-nos.
I'm glad you mentioned that you're back on the podcast, because I don't know if listeners could really tell the past 10 episodes you've had a body double. This has not actually been the Unplugged Professor for the past 10 episodes.
It was the plugged-in archaeologist.
Yeah,
yes.
But your evil twin brother did a pretty good job.
Not brother.
Oh.
Not sibling.
Oh.
Yeah, just kind of an asshole.
Oh. Yeah, I could have told you that. Lost Highway, 1997. Like the professor alluded to, there are some content warnings for the film and, as a result, for our podcast. First of all, if you're watching the movie or are about to, there's some visual warnings for potential epilepsy concerns. There's some flashing lights.
Just some flashy lights with nothing to really dilute them. It's just very large and hectic, and Kalil offered me the opportunity to watch this film in complete darkness.
I suggested it very strongly.
That is a bad idea for people who do not like flashy lights.
However, it is a great idea if you want to enjoy the movie's visuals, because it is a dark, dark movie, and not just because of the lighting, also because of the subject matter as well. Dark subject matter includes domestic abuse, violence against women, there's murder, there's dissociation, a lot of sexuality, some of which veers into like more violent, there's pornographic content. Just generally discretion advised for both the movie and if you're listening. We're going to be talking about some gritty stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I would say of the Lynch films we've gotten so far, like we've watched so far, this is probably the bleakest. Like in terms of tone, it reminds me of like Fire Walk With Me, but it's not as intimate and personal as like Laura Palmer's story. It's cold, it's detached, it's kind of gritty in a very distinctly mid-90s kind of way. You know? I say about a time period in which I was literally like a 2-year-old when this came out, but
you are a hardened child.
I knew the truth. By the way, if you don't know the truth about Lost Highway, Twin Peaks, or other David Lynch products before The Lost Highway, you may encounter some spoilers in this episode, as we are going to be talking about all kinds of things. Potentially, maybe, probably.
Probably, very likely.
Sources for trivia today include IMDb, Wikipedia, and I also feature an article from 25 years later and an article from GoombaStomp.com.
Goomba Stomp?
Yeah, I knew you were going to question it.
No, I'm not questioning, like, the fact that you brought up this article. I'm just wondering, what is Goomba Stomp?
That's exactly. I figured you'd question it.
Answer the damn question,
It's
Kalil.
Goomba Stomp.
I know what a Goomba
It's
Stomp
like
is.
Hoopa Stank?
I played the Super Mario. I know what happens when you Goomba the Stomp.
Yeah.
What is it?
That's what happens. That's what the website is. It's what happens when you Goomba the Stomp. You know Hoopa Stank, The Reason, that song from the early 2000s?
Is it a place where I can get news?
Yeah, I assume. I just used one article from them, okay? I'm not their expert. I'm not going to promote them.
I feel like
I
you
don't know
should
who
check
they
your
are.
sources. Especially if they're called Goomba Stomp.
No,
it's a great name. I'm not going against people Goomba Stomping or listening to this fantastic name. What are you?
Look, I'm not here to verify the sources. The sources verify themselves.
What?
Okay, that's what research is, okay? You find a website, they do the work of the credibility. You just grab them. You just take it and you share it to everyone you know, because if it's on the internet, it is viable, it is verifiable, it is a veritable pile of enthusiastic support from me to the website goombastomp.com.
The Unplugged Professor does not hold the same views that are shared within the Twin Peaks Logcast. If there's any sort of concern that comes through, trust me, I'm the farthest way from morality than Kalil. I mean, no.
What? He's admitted to it.
Oh, no!
His Freudian slips have finally destroyed him. Speaking of Freud, this movie is very dreamy. This movie is very steamy. This movie's got me kind of scheming. A question for you, Professor. What did you think, just in general, as we start the pod? What'd you think of Lost Highway? What's your feeling on it? You reached your hand into the box from Dune, and instead of getting the pain from the Dune box, you get Lost Highway. What's happening to your hand?
Why do you assume that I didn't get the pain?
I don't know. You got the pain. Maybe okay. If Lost Highway equal pain, you got the pain. But if it don't equal pain, what'd you get?
The only pain I'm getting is from your constant popping.
It's enthusiasm.
It's enthusiasm that requires editing.
Okay. I'm gonna step away. I'm gonna go about here.
No, stay close to the.
I'm gonna step away.
Stop. Stay in your appropriate distance from the microphone. We set this up for too long. Anyway, speaking of setting up for far too long, my thoughts.
Yes.
On The Lost Highway.
Yes.
This is a film that it was hard for me to get into at first. In fact, I tried to get to the ideal time frame for Kalil to watch things because my personal work inside my personal life would not allow me to get into that. So I put out the time, I put it aside and got ready for it. And the first half hour or so is exhausting. It is exhausting and slow and something in which I had to break and take a nap from. And then I came back to it, and that's when the energy shifted completely, in which I was able to get more immersed. Now, mind you, I think that after I had some time, after time looking through that and going through a second viewing for notes, the first half hour became more amusing to me, if you will. It's something in which I actually got excited to look deeper into with the context of the rest of the film. Is that something against me? Is that something against the film? I'm not entirely sure myself at the moment. Lost Highway is a serviceable affair of dreams. For whatever that might mean to you.
Yeah. I remember you saying off pod that you did like it. You enjoyed the movie, probably.
We've compared it to other films, and judging from my standpoint between those films, it seems like a positive reaction.
It is better than Blue Velvet.
It is better than Blue Velvet.
Maybe not as good as Wild at Heart.
Maybe not as good as Wild at Heart. Maybe around there.
Okay.
Meh.
But you enjoyed it.
Still processing.
Still
but yes.
processing. I'm a little bit different in the sense that I actually quite enjoyed the atmosphere and aesthetic of the first 30, 40 minutes. I like being submerged in the sort of darkness of the household, the shadows of the hallway leading into the peculiar curtains of the bedroom.
There's some very excellent choice moments inside that. I don't deny that. I think that one of the biggest highlights that I would recommend to people is the fantastic use of analog horror inside the film even. It's just that I feel that with the pacing of that and without appropriate sort of connection to it, I'm following around these absolute strangers on their day-to-day that it didn't get me, it didn't grab me enough.
See, and I like the mystery of trying to figure out what these people's deal is. So I was drawn into the two, and the lack of knowledge about them still worked for me.
Okay.
I could understand, though, it doesn't really give you a lot to entice you. Either it does or it doesn't, and for me, it does. Yeah, I'm just kind of biased toward this aesthetic in the film. The music. I really enjoy a lot of the soundtrack, a lot of the sound design. I do enjoy...
Badalamenti-like.
It is Badalamenti, among other people. There's some other bands in there that I really like.
Okay.
So I'm prone to that. Plus, there's just something about the use of the one location at the beginning, just having that sort of household, and like you say, the analog horror. There's just elements of the visual and sound design that really click with me to make me biased in favor of this film, to kind of compensate for some of the weaker areas that might be here.
Okay.
I do think that in terms of performances, none of the acting performances blew me away. Whereas a lot of other films, we've had standouts, we've had Dennis Hopper as Frank Booth, right? Or we've seen Kyle MacLachlan having a lot of range, or Cheryl Lee in Fire Walk With Me. There was no standout. I thought Robert Loggia was good as Dick Laurent, Mr. Eddie, but it wasn't enough to make me wowed by the acting.
All right.
I thought a lot of it was okay, but I wasn't drawn into the actors or the characters for those sort of intense moments or nuanced moments. And I do think in terms of the story, it's fairly thin. There's not really any humor here, so it has a lot more of that bleakness where it doesn't have Wizard of Oz dream motifs. It doesn't have chicken walks, right? The best you get is maybe a couple detectives joking now and then in a car. So it is definitely something that's a mood piece that isn't always going to be my go-to.
Yeah.
If I was to show someone David Lynch for the first time, Lost Highway is one of the least likely I would show them.
Okay.
Because if they're kind of in the mood where they like a bit of humor, I'd probably pick something that has some humor in it. Or if there's someone who's kind of more casual viewing, I think like Blue Velvet's pretty approachable because it's operating within like a noir trope, like genre conventions. Or Eraserhead is just like a really quirky, like out there thing. Lost Highway is a weird mishmash of some of the Lynch ideas we've had seen so far, but stripped away of the warmth that sometimes accompanies them.
I would almost argue that for the actor for Fred, he actually does put out a performance that I think really hits home, if you will, on what tone the first portion of the film needs. I made an example for you as you were passing by while I was watching the film, that there was a bit of the Shining feeling coming off from him, and it's I have things in my head, I have things in the percolator that really do lean into that more, and I think enhances my personal experience. So I think that if I had to highlight someone's performance through that,
Bill
with that
Pullman.
fun bit of layers, yes, Bill Pullman.
I think it's interesting how this movie strips away a lot of the small town or like 1950s optimism we see sometimes Lynch use, whether ironically or sincerely. You know, you see it in Twin Peaks a lot, you see it in Blue Velvet. This is very, you know, Los Angeles, but the darkest corners of it.
I disagree in the respect that I don't feel a scale of a place. I see like they're in certain areas. They're in a garage for a bit. They're at a house party for people.
They're set pieces without really a place.
Yes, I think that it's just like moments. I think the biggest sort of like scope of a place we get is a mostly empty highway, if you will, on the outskirts of a city.
There are scenes where pretty prominently in the distance you could see the Hollywood, you know, insignia on the mountain, right?
You can see it, yeah.
So there is a sense of it rooting in a place. There is a sense in which it being in a place matters, but it isn't a place that has sort of a cohesion or an identity to it the way that, you know, Lumberton does or the way that Twin Peaks does.
Agreed.
Or even the dark cities that we saw in Eraserhead.
Yes.
Had a sort of identity to the place. This is, again, I keep using the word cold, but that is the main feeling I have from it. And I like that. I like that distillation. I'm glad that there is a Lynch work that does explore that feeling. It is pretty good. I like it. I feel like it's probably in my top 4 of the ones we've seen so far.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think as far as tones go, it may not be like a big town or small city sort of feel for me, but it's most certainly a red room.
Yeah, there do be one of those.
There do be the red curtains that, you know, you can walk amongst. There is certain entities that seem almost supernatural-like, if you will. And there's, as you had mentioned before, a very dreamlike appeal.
There's a lot of the director's handiwork in here. A lot of situations and ideas that we've seen in other films, reworked in a bit different tone and maybe theming this time.
Yeah.
But it isn't totally out of Lynch's wheelhouse either. You can see a lot of Lynch's ideas, but there is another writer here, not just Lynch. And I thought this was pretty interesting. So David Lynch wrote the script with Barry Gifford, who wrote the book Wild at Heart. So after making Wild at Heart movie, they got along pretty well. The author liked the movie, and they decided to work together on this. And Lynch said that he got the name Lost Highway.
I'm thankful that it was the positive sort of encounter. Otherwise being like, listen, Lynch, like you didn't realize like from your film from beforehand, that was nothing. That was like, let me show you how to write a film. We're going to put this together. I'm going to drag you in there. And we're going to get something done here. Something actually good.
But Lynch got the name for Lost Highway from a page in Gifford's book, Night People. And in that book, the page, he saw the words Lost and Highway. I don't even know if they were together, but he saw them on the page, and it clicked with him. So the two agreed to write a screenplay together. Each gave their own ideas for what they wanted Lost Highway to be, and then they just rejected all of the ideas the other person said, and they said themselves. And instead, Lynch then told Barry Gifford that during the last night of shooting Fire Walk with Me, so just finishing up Fire Walk with Me, Lynch had a thought about videotapes and a couple in crisis. It just kind of appeared to him. I don't know if it was in a dream, if it was in a meditation, or he was just drinking some coffee. What's the difference, right? Either way, he was experiencing some kind of brain idea burst, the Jimmy Neutron brain blast, right? And this idea would then develop into the first part of the film until, Fred Madison is put on death row. Lynch and Gifford then realized that a transformation had to occur, and another story, which would have several links to the first one but also differ, developed. And it took them about a month to finish the script together. So we do have this interesting joining then, not just of Lynch's writing, but also Barry Gifford, who previously had been the writer for the novel Wild at Heart.
All right. Interesting. Especially with just David Lynch's working relationships with authors, if you will. Like, it's people who predominantly work with books from the sounds of it between Gifford as well as Frost.
And I will say that as far as the dialogue is concerned, I do think it's a well-written film. There's no lines, really, in hardly any Lynch work. There's rarely any lines that make me think, like, oh, that could have been better.
Porno? Give you a boner?
There's weird lines. There's, unusual cadences that he may have the actors give it in. But it's not like it feels derivative in the script. It doesn't feel like... You made a comment off pod about how there's moments in the film where it's got the energy of one of those, like, we're not so different, you and I, kind of scenes, but it doesn't ever use that kind of, like, overdone, cliche terminology. So even when it dabbles into some familiar concepts, either for Lynch or for genre conventions, it still does feel like it has an identity of its own. I think there are some very well-written, like, moments and lines in here. It would be curious, though, to know how much of this is Lynch and how much of this is your other writer here, because I don't know Gifford's history enough. I haven't read his books to know what sort of stories he crafts. I mean, it's easy to look at something that's this focused on, like, dreamlike feeling and doppelganger transformations and being like, Lynch, this is David Lynch. But then it's also like, well, what if we find out, no, Gifford thought of a lot of that too. So, I don't know. I just thought that was kind of curious.
It was just entirely just like Gifford made the whole entire film. It's like, what if it had a vampire?
That's the only contribution David Lynch made the entire time. For clarification, you're referring to the character in the credits called Mystery Man, right?
Yes, and the mystery is he's a vampire.
So you're going to call him a vampire.
He's a vampire.
You're not going to call him Mystery Man.
He's a vampire.
Okay. As long as we're clear, it's the same thing you did at Wild at Heart when you were calling Lula. That's her name, right?
Exactly. Guess what you can mix up? Peanut.
Anyway.
Who was actively called that through the film.
Lulu? No, it's Lula. I was right. It's Lula. It's not Lulu. It's not Lulu.
You see this? I don't have to worry about this with Peanut, and I'm having fun over here.
You can just make up people's names. Well, David Lynch likes to call people by whatever name he comes up with,
You're
too.
the one who named the child!
I know your name is Madchin. I'm calling you Madchkin. Anyway. When asked the meaning of the film, David Lynch gave a straight answer. No, he gave kind of more of an answer than I would have thought, though. He referred to the film as a psychogenic fugue, which is a form of dissociation where a person temporarily loses awareness of their identity, including their memories and their personality.
All right.
That's way more straightforward than I would have expected David Lynch to give. It's not quite a full answer, but he does, again, compare it to a psychogenic fugue. The notion of this fugue was incorporated into the film after the unit publicist for the film read it up on a book about mental illnesses. Lynch felt it was a musical term, stating that a fugue starts off one way, takes up on another direction, and then comes back to the original. So it, and then like brackets, relates to the form of the film. So there's a weird thing going on where it's a psychogenic fugue in the sense of you can read into the character's loss of awareness of their identity and memories and personality, shifting to another person as being like a psychogenic fugue, as a mental state. But then also a fugue in terms of music, that it is acting as that, and I'm not a music expert here, but taking Lynch's own definition here, it takes another direction and then comes back to the way it was originally.
All right.
So that's curious.
That is a curious thing.
I think that's a neat little double word in there, double play. It's like a hot fudge sundae, but it's got fudge on top. You know what I'm saying?
Where else do you put the fudge?
No, it's like a fudge ice cream, but then you have hot fudge on top. You know? It's double fudge.
Do you know how hot fudge works?
Shut up. Don't bully me. Notably, in case you think this connects at all, in the scene where Mystery Man, played by Robert Blake, confronts Fred Madison, played by Bill Pullman, at the party, he hands him his cell phone and instructs him to call his own home. And there's this close-up at that moment where you can notice on Fred's hand, as he's punching in the number, that there is, between his index finger and thumb, a tattoo of a fermata, a element in musical notation, indicating a note that should be sustained for longer than its note value would indicate. So apparently this is consistent with the scene of his character continuing to play his solo at the Luna Lounge even after the rest of the band has stopped playing. The idea of the fermata or the music note being carried longer than its denotation might suggest. So depending on how much you want to read into this idea, the fugue, the fermata, there seems to be a musical element that Lynch had kind of in the background that you could be, totally forgiven if you didn't even notice the hand thing. I didn't notice the thing on the hand.
I noticed the thing on the hand. I just didn't know what it was per se. But seeing as he's a musician, it wouldn't be...
It makes sense. It tracks. But thematically, you could read into that idea of something being carried on long and withdrawn. There's something you can do with that.
There's a lot you can do here.
So I'll let that percolate for a little bit. So genre. We know we love to talk about genre of what these movies are.
You do. You do.
So generally it's classified as a neo-noir. I think that was from Wikipedia. And I'm kind of like, I can see how Blue Velvet is noir. I can get that. This is a little bit of a stretch for me to call it noir. It's divorced from a lot of the trappings I'm used to, at least.
Okay.
Mainly, I think of the way the protagonists, singular or plural, depending on what you consider Fred and Pete, how those two are not really investigating anything to me. I mean, Fred is pursuing violence at a certain point. I guess you could say he's investigating his wife's dealings.
I mean, like...
Kind of.
In the background, the detectives are following along, like, almost constantly. They're consistent presence. It's just more so, we're not following the detectives. We're in the middle of the action.
You could call Alice a not really damsel in distress. You could call Alice a femme fatale is what I meant to say. You can call Alice a femme fatale, but... even that feels to be like a thin, almost misdirection, I think, at a certain point. So I'm not as sold on noir for myself, and maybe that's just my own ignorance of the genre. That's not where I would go for. It also does get labeled as a psychological thriller and a horror film, which I'm more sympathetic to call it a psychological thriller than I am to call it a noir.
All right.
Most of the movie's runtime isn't necessarily scary, but the general atmosphere and mood during the first 40 minutes is very tense and dark and unknown. And the appearance of the mystery man / vampire, I think, does evoke that horror idea. So I'm more inclined to call it that. And you've compared it to The Shining, the Kubrick version. And that I would call a psychological thriller as well. So I think there's some grounds for that. It also does borrow from German Expressionism and French New Wave. I'm a little more familiar with German Expressionism at the moment because I've just gone back and I'm watching a lot of classical films and, watched Nosferatu, and I was watching The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. So I'm a little bit more like, Baby's First German Expressionism is kind of in my brain recently. But not Baby's First isn't they're bad, but in the sense of those are the ones everyone knows. But when I see The Mystery Man, I look at the makeup and the presentation, that is not at all too different from German Expressionism. Like that sort of stark white that they have on the skin. Reminds me a lot of looking at like the man in All the Black in Caligari, the sort of the hypnosis somnambulist person. So I do get a bit of that influence, even if it's not a German Expressionist film, but there is German Expressionism in it. My question for you, Professor, of course, is what genre would you call this? If you were describing this movie to someone, they're like, what kind of movie is it?
Let's go with thriller for now, like psychological thriller. At this time, usually whenever it comes to dealing with genre, I have a hard time putting things into a cup, if you will. The cup named genre.
Does the cup overfloweth?
The cup sits in a cup. The cup is in a cup.
The cup is inside of another cup?
We have multiple cups.
It's like double cups?
Maybe.
On purpose or an accident? Because I know sometimes when I'm grabbing a cup, I'll accidentally grab two that are connected to each other. Like I did that yesterday with styrofoam cups, and I was really surprised how tall the cup was.
I'm not sure. I'm just putting liquid inside the cup.
Oh. You're not even looking at the cup, you're pouring the liquid in.
The cup.
That's really dangerous. You could accidentally pour. What if there is a small child next to the cup and you just poured the drink all over the child? What if the drink is acid?
This is why we don't let children listen to our podcast. This is why we actively just work on our podcast with adults, the elderly, the dead, the living. I don't know who listens right now. Whatever state of being you are currently in.
The bots.
Please let us know at snakeoutdreams@gmail.com or snakeoutdreams1, the numeral 1, as in, I don't care what one genre.
You could say that we're searching for connections with you, audience. We are trying to connect in the same way that one could make connections between Lost Highway and other films that David Lynch has worked on. So, Lost Highway is the first of 3 David Lynch films that are going to be set in Los Angeles. Spoiler? I don't know.
Oh, no.
So, Mulholland Drive is literally named after, like, Mulholland Drive in L.A., so that's pretty obvious.
Los Angeles is Mulholland Drive?
Yeah. And then Inland Empire is also based on Inland Empire, which is also an area
in truth, like, it makes things easier to record when you're actually taking place in the city, like you're dealing with most of the stuff.
I never hear anyone refer to them as, like, you know, the Los Angeles trilogy or something, but they are, like, 3 films that are all linked in the same geographic area. Yeah. And they have other similarities we'll get to as we get to them, but it is notable that this is kind of the first of 3, and they get progressively more.
They get more Los Angeles?
I'm not going to say what they get more of, but they get more, and I will say Inland Empire is the most.
I'm just imagining, like, this horrifying, just, like, city that floats above, city that floats below, and then the one that's underneath the ground of the city, but they're all Los Angeles.
Yes.
Like, that's just the settings, the Omni-Langeles.
Yes. According to the script from this film, the scene with Mr. Eddie and the tailgater takes place on Mulholland Drive. It's not actually confirmed in the film, but in the script, it is on Mulholland Drive.
Okay.
Apparently, also, there's going to be a motor vehicle accident that happens on the same spot in the movie Mulholland Drive.
Now, Kalil, you and I off pod were discussing beforehand just like the strange sort of like continued elements David Lynch puts forward, if you will. Is there just some form of argument to put forward for like the David Lynch extended universe?
I think that's where the return will come in, and we'll have to decide at that point. Have to decide at that point how unified you think this field is.
I feel like every time that we say that, we'll get to it when we get to the return. Someone could take a drink, but be safe because the distance.
I'm just hoping no one's keeping track of all the things we've said to put a pin in for the return, because I ain't looking back on those episodes to unpin everything. I don't even know anymore, man.
It's just a pin board now. It's
so
just where we
many.
store all the pins.
Yeah, call me Pinhead. Some pins were removed from Lost Highway, however. The pins known as content.
Just tearing them right out.
Tearing that content right out.
Oh, God.
So that there is no missing pieces or, like, you know, huge uncovered archival footage to my knowledge.
Yeah.
But the first original cut of Lost Highway ran 2.5 hours. And a test audience of about 50 people were given a preview cut and suggested what to be taken down. So it went from 2.5 to 2 hours and 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Of that 20 minutes that were cut, we do have some information on the deleted scenes.
So these are never released, or?
To my knowledge. Okay. To my knowledge. There were scenes about Pete's life, including a scene where Pete would go out with his friends to a drive-in before then going to the bowling alley. Instead, we just got him going from the bowling part to the dance club part. Yeah. Some scenes that were filmed but edited from the final version include more conversation between Fred and Renee and the police officers, a scene where a medical examiner brings 2 girls to the autopsy of Renee's corpse and chats with them about the murder, more prison scenes, a scene in which Pete stands in front of his parents but they are unable to see him, and a similar scene in which Pete cannot be seen by his girlfriend Sheila. Those last 2 are the ones that I guess are percolating in my brain the most, is the idea of it's like vampires you can't see them in mirror reflections or something. Mm-hmm. This is not the vampire you're talking about, but you know what I mean? The idea that he's like not there but is there.
Yeah.
There's something to be said about that. Or is there? So we get 2 main characters that could be 1 main character depending on how you view things. So before we jump fully into talking about Fred Madison and his arc at the beginning here, do you want to give any sort of context for your mindset on this film, like your interpretations, your theory crafting, anything? Because this movie, I would say of the ones we've covered so far with Lynch, this is the most dense and most confusing from just like a simple explanation standpoint. It might have some clear themes, some clear ideas that you can walk away with as a general audience, but I do think this is one where it's a bit trickier to get into, and I myself do not claim to fully understand Lost Highway.
I think that the main key, like the puzzle piece,
the key lime pie
puzzle piece that puts this all together,
delicious,
is Fred's statement on like how he hates video cameras.
Mm-hmm.
It's one line that's brought up in the middle of this introduction to Fred, if you will.
Yeah.
And it's that he likes to remember things his own way, how he remembered them, not necessarily how they happened.
There are certain lines in this movie that feel very important by the way they're delivered and by the emphasis. That is one of those lines.
It is very important going forward.
I feel like that line, and then the other line, if I had to pick like a number 2, is that moment where I believe it's at that moment Alice says that you will never have me. That's the other moment where it feels like everything stops to zoom in on that dialogue choice. Would you agree that's also kind of up there?
It's up there, but for also the reasons of the line that we made beforehand.
Yeah. Those are the two guiding key line pieces for me, at least. Yeah. So Fred Madison, he's played by Bill Pullman. I recently was rewatching. I think I've ever actually seen it before, or I only saw parts of it. But Independence Day, the movie about the aliens coming and Will Smith fighting them, and Bill Pullman's the president in that movie.
Oh,
he gives a very like over the top president performance. I think he's the highlight of the movie. I was really surprised how little Will Smith there is in it. But that's beside the fact. My point is, aside from Independence Day and then this, I don't think I've seen a lot of Bill Pullman in things, but he's got a very recognizable face and voice. For me, sorry, I know you're not always best with those things, but for me, it's like Bill Pullman is an identity. I can understand Bill Pullman. I just haven't seen him around a lot.
I haven't seen him around whatsoever. I guess that's a little bit of a lie because I've seen parodies, if you will, of like that big speech of Independence Day. Haven't seen the film, but it's like, but this is our Independence Day.
That would be him.
Yep, that would be him. So that, like, this is probably my first true introduction to Bill Pullman in general.
Mm-hmm. What'd you think?
I really enjoyed his performance and just how unfettered and just sort of like detached he sort of like becomes more and more as we get deeper into his character.
Like a psychogenic fugue.
Like a psychogenic fugue.
One could say.
Perhaps one could say. Mm-hmm. It sounds like psychogenic fugue. Serious matter.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It is something in which people have to suffer through. This is still a word that has come up to me right now, and it sounds like something that I'd get out of like a Japanese RPG, as someone is like he's preparing the psychogenic fugue.
Just sounds like a scientific fantasy term.
It sounds like it, yes. So if there's any point of giggling that I have, it is not against the issue or anything like that. It's just a very neat new word for me.
Fair enough. Or series of words, perhaps. Because psychogenic
it's
and
two, yes, I get it.
2 words!
It's 2. Okay. I get it. Speaking of the 2 that may be 1.
Fred. We get Fred smoking in his house and looking really, really pensive. I think is what I'll use that word pensive. I'll say that. He looks the way that the professor looks at me when I start talking about annoying things. It kind of just seems like he was already from the get-go kind of perturbed. And he gets this message at the door that some dude named Dick Laurent is dead.
Yep, just he clicks on the little button and says Dick Laurent is dead. And he just like listens to it, goes up to the overall window and looks right out and sees that no one's there. There's also the sound of police sirens that are deep within the background, if you will. But we have a conversation with the wife, if you will, who is just around the corner, if you will, very nicely dressed with what seems to be a form of a very nice red nightgown, as she says that she's not going to go to the club tonight. She's just going to stay at home, and she's going to read. And that's when our dear character, Fred, sort of like approaches, if you will. And it's just like this weird sort of like voice, almost just like playing at something, but he's just like, read what, Renee? As they both sort of just like laugh at one another. They make a comment with one another in which
he says it's nice that he can still make her laugh. And
she just says that she likes to laugh. It's not even just like acknowledging that she's laughing off from him, but more so she likes to laugh. And it's like, that's why I married you. Mm-hmm. And it's almost as if he's like trying to pry like validation from her.
There's a lot that I think could be worked through with their relationship and with their encounters, few as we get between Fred and Renee because of the runtime, but so much is packed within those moments where there's shifting power dynamics. A lot of it is in the body language. You'll see Fred kind of domineering over, leering over, towering over. She's avoiding direct eye contact.
She's avoiding direct eye contact. There are scenes in which she is actively sitting away from the individual in question, Fred. And there's obviously there's a firm tension, there's a firm distance between these two characters. Even just like when he goes out to this overall bar situation and he's just going to town playing, it seems that the thought of just like her just being at home is still bothersome enough that after his performance and after he gets really into it and is just going crazy on his sax, it's cut so that it looks like immediately after he goes straight to the phone, pops a few quarters in and makes a call and checks in, and all the phones are ringing throughout all the house. It's clearly his house, and
Yes.
it's got a saxophone in the house. It must be a backup sax. I don't know. But regardless, no answer. It's just quiet.
Yeah, it's like he's checking up on his wife to see if she's really reading at home. And when no one answers, that would indicate that she's probably not home, or else she would answer the phone. And it's hard to read because when I'm watching them, the first time I watched it, well, I shouldn't say the first. I watched this movie years ago, and I kind of remember parts of it. But when I was watching it for this pod recording, I was kind of tapping into this idea of like, okay, he seems very controlling, possibly abusive. He seems very, in a way that she's maybe averting his gaze because she's afraid, or she's, trying to be cautious with him. But then also, I when I was kind of walking in and you were watching it, I was watching it from the other side where it's like, well, what if she's more toying with him and she's more like not meeting his gaze because she doesn't want to give him the satisfaction of like meeting his eye level. And she almost is just not even caring. She's like, yeah, I'm just going to go read. And her neutral tone isn't because she's being cautious. Her neutral tone is kind of flippant. And she's more in control of the situation. He's trying to exert his physicality over her, but she's not really affected by it. And it's like both of those views work. There was kind of a competing thing in my brain between, is this signs of he's controlling, he's abusive, or is this signs that she's aloof, she is someone who gets behind his back and he knows it gets under his skin, and she's not affected by it at all.
I think the lack of clarity, if you will, is probably the biggest motivator in his own sort of anxieties in the whole entire situation, on how he is very, what seems to be fearful and frustrated and angry at his current situation of this lack of connection.
Going back a bit to the Dick Laurent is dead message at the door, according to co-writer and director David Lynch, the first scene in the film where we have that message is based on an incident which occurred in his own life. He says that early one morning, his intercom buzzed, and when he answered it, a voice he didn't recognize said, "Dick Laurent is dead." And you're probably thinking like, oh, similar thing happened. No, the exact same name, Dick Laurent is dead. However, by the time he got to the front of the house to look out the window, no one was outside.
I like the idea that there's just like they said, there was just a guy who just like sent the message to the wrong place. So like there's like this secret sort of like crime family that's just watching this movie and just out, just relaxing as Dick Laurent's name is put on blast, if you will, in front of a whole audience, and being like, I gotta go. I gotta leave. Goodbye.
The house in which Fred Madison lives also was designed by David Lynch, including the furniture. Just was all designed by David Lynch, and it like belonged to him.
Okay.
The three paintings that are visible in their house that are above like Fred and Renee's sofa are by David Lynch's ex-wife.
Okay.
Those three paintings. This is a part that in the trivia kind of confused me because I'm not exactly sure how this works, but it says the text of the one wherein the woman reads a note from her child was reproduced in a David Foster Wallace essay regarding the movie's production. So supposedly this is what the note says on the painting, but because of how far you are from the painting, you could never have read this. But, dear Mom, I keep having my fish dream. They bite my face. Tell Dad I don't take naps. The fishes are skinny and mad. I miss you. His wife makes me eat trouts and anchovies. The fishes make noises and they blow bubbles. Also, noises is spelled Nosis. Bubbles is spelled Bubbels. How are you? Then something unreadable. You fine? Don't forget to lock the doors. The fishes, something unreadable. Me, they hate me. Love, form instead of from, Dana, all caps. Yeah, so there's also some paintings I noticed with fish. So there's this weird fish dream thing happening in the paintings that I don't know. You can't see it as a viewer, so I don't know how to verify any of that. But that was just kind of wild. Did you have any thoughts on the dear mom? I keep having my fish dream. They bite my face.
If it's from the ex-wife, I think that it just was visually nice there. I don't think that's anything connected to the film specifically. I don't think that the intention was for anyone to actually read that. You are the one, though. You have that power, and you have announced it to the world.
Now you know.
Now you know.
I think it's weirdly unsettling, the idea of the fish eating the face of the child during his dreams. It's a good image.
I miss childhood nightmares.
I didn't remember dreams a lot, so I can't say I miss them. You have any good ones you want to share?
Black and white hellscape maze in which I stand upon the walls.
Okay.
Like the walls above the maze. So it's very hard to solve a maze when you're standing within like the gaps of one. It was funky. I miss funky dreams.
You know what else is pretty funky? The Luna Lounge. When you've got Bill Pullman on the saxophone. So, epilepsy warning, flashing strobe blue lights happening during the saxophone show. Fred is really into playing the saxophone. Really into it. He's just going off on that saxophone.
It seems that it's his passion.
And like was noted earlier, he continues after the band to stop playing. And the way it fades to white, there's a few moments, especially during Fred's part, where it'll fade to white. I almost want to say his playing is orgasmic. I almost want to say like he is experiencing just the blinding ecstasy of his saxophone, because it's not even too different from, I think there's a white flash after the sex scene when he like, oh, we'll get to that, but after he's kind of clearly done with his part of the sex. So I don't know if there's some kind of connection being drawn there that this guy enjoys the saxophone in a very pleasurable, visceral way.
Oh, I think it's less about like the fact that it's the sax specifically and more so of the orgasm light. Like, I think that orgasming is actually a important theme when it comes to this character.
There you go. You heard it first here, folks. And Bill Pullman really is playing the saxophone. That is him. That is not like, fake. He did not know how to play before the part, and then he learned how to play just for that part. To play that solo.
Good for him.
Yeah.
Music is a fun sort of like skill to keep on to the side because it's nice. And it's overall either relaxing or a good release, I find. But
Speaking of good release, the bedroom.
The bedroom. Not only does he get the sort of like personal confirmation that she is there inside the bedroom and she is asleep. There was a comment made beforehand in which after he seems to sort of like lean on towards her, if you will, she made the comment almost to like reassure him that you can wake me up if you want. Clearly sort of like leaning into that sexual act sort of like mentality. But still, it is something in which is clearly important for what they are doing right now, or at the very least important to him between them with their relationship. And that continues after there is a point where, say, for example, they have intimacy, if you will, in this very same room, this red bedroom. But I say that because there's red curtains that lead down the hallways.
We need to talk about the setting here. So in his house, Fred turns a corner into this sort of dark, almost alley-looking hallway where there's just total darkness. You cannot see any of the discerning features in the hallway itself.
And it's only after a little bit, especially when there's a little adjustment where it's made more clear that at the end of the hallway, there are the red curtains. It marks inside my head, and I believe that you mentioned that this was post-Twin Peaks.
Yes, this is right after Fire Walk With Me as far as the movie.
Like when, say, for example, Dale Cooper is walking down the hallway with red curtains and hanging a right, if you will. Hanging a right specifically.
Yeah. It's really easy for me to suggest that this is like going into the subconscious, right? Like there's this dark space that is being traversed from the normal waking day life to this otherworldly realm, but the otherworldly realm is the blood red location of sex, which there's so much loaded in even just saying in that for Fred and for this film in general that I really do enjoy the red curtains. I don't think it's derivative. I think that the curtains are maybe doing similar things that they're doing in Twin Peaks. But red curtains are not unique to just Twin Peaks. I mean, I think I mentioned this before. I want to say it was Blue Velvet, but the idea of the curtains being used, for a theater performance or for like a film, you have the curtains come up in front of the screen and then they exit and the movie can happen. And then the curtains come back down. It's very much an opening and closing to a film or to a world experience. So having the red curtains be an entry point into another world means in Twin Peaks, the Black Lodge. Here, going toward the curtains is entering a different world, but it's in this strange world of intimacy between husband and wife who seem to low-key hate each other, fear each other, some sort of amalgamation of negative emotions, because everything about the ambiance of those two together in the bedroom is foreboding.
I wouldn't go as far as hate personally, mainly because of what seems to be thematically important in these rooms and thematically important throughout the film itself, and that is sex. It is something in which
it can be hateful sex.
The bedroom, It could be, but I don't think that it is that. At least not in this room at this time, mind you.
The way I worded it, by the way, the music, it's conveyed like a mechanical satanic disaster, like a blood sacrifice is going on or something.
But yes, inside of this very room, there is a sort of atmosphere that we are hung into, and with elements of porno being brought up later, if you will, just having this room and this place away from like the prying eyes, if you will. They rest. There's no windows. It's just this like closed off atmosphere. And eventually, when the sex does occur, the most important part is that when he's moving about and the music begins to twist and just sort of like become horrifying, there's a point where her hand reaches out and says it's okay as he's panting heavily. What I'm imagining to be he is unable to perform.
He prematurely ejaculated.
I don't believe it's even prematurely ejaculated.
I believe it.
I believe that. No,
based on the white flash, yeah.
I don't believe. Was there a white flash?
That's what I wrote. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, basically, pretty soon after the sex scene starts, there's that white flash, and that's when the pat happens on the back. So I'm interpreting it very, like you said, the orgasmic white light. I am assuming that he finished very early here.
From the way that it seemed like to me, just because of the way sort of like it slows down amongst it.
I mean, the effect is the same. He's not able to actually please his wife, regardless of the situation.
Regardless of the situation. It's not something in which like he can get as heavy and passionate, such as with Pete later in the film.
Not him with Pete, because they're the same consciousness at that moment. Just to clarify.
Potentially, yes. In which he's able to passionately perform, and it becomes this sort of like big event, especially towards the end of the film. It's something that unfortunately dies down and dies off, and she wraps her fingers around him and says it's okay, but the biggest thing is like it shows their wedding ring, almost like this cold piece of metal sort of like pressing onto his back as like this heavy reminder of that they're bonded together. And yet he can do really nothing about this situation, which seems, again, important for them.
And you gave me kind of a quick hint earlier, but I do have a little bit more to say about that idea that it does feel like almost mechanical or ritualistic. I feel like during the actual sex scene itself, there's that foreboding music which inspires no love or intimacy emotionally in the situation. And it feels like this is just something that they do. This is just part of the routine. This is a thing that happens. And the mixture of the red curtains and the music and everything that's happening here gives it the feeling of some sort of dark exercise. So to me, when he's not able to please his wife and, you know, it is kind of just this abrupt moment, there isn't any love or intimacy when I watch this. And that's kind of where, like I said, I don't think it's a stretch to say they still might hate each other. And you could even argue emotionally that element in which they are blocked, like that hatred or that doubt or that uncertainty or that fear, there is something blocking the flow of that relationship and that love that very much could be related to the effect of not being able to perform. That there is something in the relationship that is causing that disturbance, and it is affecting his ability to show that love to her.
I'll recognize that as a reading, but I don't really feel the same way. I think that this is still their overall act. I think that the overall gaze that he ends up putting towards her, especially when she's dressing off towards the side, there is a sense of want, if you will. There's something that's going on. It's just this anxiety, this fear, this overall idea, and this sense of doubt is what is overclouding everything to the point that this is now a distorted sort of act. Dark ritual, I'll agree as far into, because there is an attempt to try to break past this barrier, but it is all for naught.
And the fact that they didn't really further discuss the fact that he had called. You know, at no point is there direct communication. He just lingers with that doubt and uncertainty without really any confrontation there. Where we do see her a little bit more energized and Renee being a bit more involved is at the pool party. So there's this blue light forming over the pool. That's a very distinct like visual, which I think pays off later because you see that blue light again in the pool and you can immediately be taken back to that place, even if it's been like an hour ago. So I thought it was a very effective like establishing shot. And there's this guy named Andy there, and it's Andy's like pool party that this all happens. And we saw Andy also in the audience at Fred's saxophone concert at the Luna Lounge.
Yes.
Got this kind of like stenciled on mustache kind of vibe going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And
he's very much someone aesthetically very Bobby Peru.
Yeah. And while they're kind of together, it seems like Renee knows Andy a bit better than Fred does. To the extent that Fred doesn't really understand how she met that guy. Like, doesn't really understand what's going on. To which she vaguely replies that, she's just a friend. And, he's just a friend. And while Fred is going away to get drinks, we don't really know what Renee and Andy are talking about. Fred ends up encountering who I'm going to call the mystery man, as the credits say. You're going to call the vampire, which is
He's
fine.
a vampire, yes.
And we'll... More on him later. Put a pin in that man's face.
Stop putting pins everywhere.
Put a pin.
It's a safety hazard.
Make him into a pinhead. And Fred ends up asking Andy, catching up with him, who that mystery man was that he just talked to. Weird things that happened. And Andy says he doesn't know him, but he thinks he's a friend of Dick Laurent's, which bothers Fred. He's at the moment that name is mentioned, Fred looks kind of confused, and he's like, Dick Laurent is dead, isn't he? And Andy responds, he is. And it's kind of like a question. He's like, I don't think Dick Laurent is dead. He can't be dead. And then he's like, wait, how did you know who he is again? And Fred is just awkward.
He also does mentions, like, how do you know he's dead?
Yeah, how do you know he's dead? He can't be dead. And then Fred says he doesn't really know him. And, Andy at this point seems alarmed, like, who told you that? Who's trying to say that to you? How do you even know who this guy is? So it clues us in pretty early into the movie that there is more to the Andy, Dick Laurent, like, background connection. And just even, again, that weird coincidence of the random name on the but the doorbell. And even then, it's hearing that name again that, hasn't been in the movie for about, probably 20 minutes by this point almost. Mm-hmm. It kind of starts bringing some of the pieces together. So I like that sort of slow drip feed of information that we get in that part of the movie.
Okay.
So a lot of things are happening in the background to further develop the creepy, weird elements of the film. But if we just, for a moment, look away from those and just kind of pins, where this is going. They go to their house after the party, and there's some light flashing around, like, inside their house. You can see it through the windows.
Yes.
And Fred thinks that there might be someone inside, so he orders Renee to stay in the car, and he passes through the red curtains. The phone is ringing a few times, and then it stops. Which now, knowing what we know, we wonder, who was on the line there. Was that going to end up being the mystery man, or was that Fred calling himself? I like to believe it's Fred calling himself from earlier, but, who knows? And he comes back out and he says, okay, there wasn't anyone there. And Renee was like, was confused. And he was like, yeah, of course there wasn't anyone there. And we get this shot of Fred looking into the darkness for a long time and then eventually looking in a mirror. And I couldn't quite tell because I was trying to figure out, like, if there's any tricks going on with the mirrors in this film, because we get a similar shot later with Pete looking in the mirror. And I could not tell if, like, if Pete was moving at a different rate as his reflection, or if Fred was moving at a different rate as his reflection. I could not tell. Mm-hmm. My mind was hyper-focused on it, and I tried. I don't know if that was something you paid attention to or not, or if there anything that stood out.
Nothing I really focused on, mainly because I just think that it's like the reflections David Lynch has used before, except instead of like separate actors used, it's just something of an eerie visual to forebode something a bit darker with the character.
Because I wouldn't be surprised if this was shot with the same actor in two different positions, and it's not really a mirror, it's just the same actor doing, like, mirroring himself.
I think that's just a good practice to have, because otherwise you have the cameraman in the shot.
Fair. You know what I mean, though. I feel like there's something going on with this shot, but okay. And then Renee, meanwhile, was removing her makeup in the bathroom, and she comes out of the bedroom, and then she immediately hesitates and freezes up. She goes out of the darkness because she can't find Fred, and she's calling out for him. And then eventually Fred emerges from that darkness. He looks like stone-faced. And the next thing we know, it's the next morning. And it's just Fred on his own. Okay? And what happens during this moment, then, is likely, implied, clearly stated, that Fred had murdered his wife after coming out from that darkness. Mm-hmm. So, interesting that they both came back from the party, went respectively to their different mirrors, one to stare at himself and one to remove makeup, and then when they next come back after he emerges from that darkness, he has this intent to kill.
That the biggest part, I would say, with this is that the difference, he's silently looking into a mirror, intensely, almost shining like. Well, she, after looking into the mirror, walks away and calls out to Fred in the darkness.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes it seem more malicious from Fred's side, if anything.
And what sort of builds this up is recurring throughout this first 40 minutes, this aspect of analog horror and VHS tapes. One of the things that I like most about the film, and just kind of when I think of Lost Highway, this is one of my favorite elements, is even though it's not very often, the sparing use of seeing the VHS tapes on the television and the effect of that. I think it gives it sort of, again, that sort of 90s feeling, but it does cement it in a time and a place, sort of. So going back to the past, Samurai Jack, that sort of deal. The wife gets the mail and she steps outside the door. This is earlier in the film, and there's a manila envelope with a VHS tape inside. And when she's like opening this up and looking at what it is, Fred shows up behind her and she like gasps like she's startled.
Yep, he just like snuck up behind her, and in one respect, Fred could read that as just like he's just suddenly there, but more likely, I think, is that he's catching her on a suspicious act.
See, originally when I watched this, I was still in the mindset of he's like an abuser or he's controlling, and her gasp was more the sign that she doesn't know what happens when he shows up behind her. This sort of like initial fear of lock-up freezing of like, what are you doing here? Okay, trying to like, she doesn't know to be on her guard or not with him, because you don't know what to predict from someone like that.
All right.
But then again, upon thinking about it now, it's like, well, she has those connections to Andy. She might be thinking this is one of his films. And if this is one of the pornos from him, she was just caught with it. That's going to further implicate her in things.
If that is to be true.
Yes. So there's multiple ways to read this, especially if you've already seen the film.
I think that it's also important that it's much more quiet around the first point of the film. Just as a little bit of a note as we continue on. He looks pretty normal, if you will. He comes around. They're still very quiet and soft-spoken with one another, but still there's a clear tension. And with this VHS coming out of nowhere, in which she claims that she has no idea, no marks or anything like that.
And she does not show as much interest in playing it. He's the one that suggests that they should see what's on the tape.
Yes.
Which, again, if she thinks she already knows what it is, she may not be interested in seeing it, or she just might not be that interested for any reason.
It doesn't seem like she herself is, like, behaving any points of defensive or anything like that.
But
it's
neither
something
intrigue,
enough,
though.
But it's still enough, I would say, from a motivation from Fred to be like, you've got a tape.
Yeah,
why don't we see what's on the tape?
Already
He's got
distrusting.
a cadence. He's got this cadence of it just being like, okay, then. Let's get to the bottom.
To be fair, if someone dropped a VHS tape randomly on my door, I would want to see what's on it,
But it wasn't, he's so directed at her.
Yes, for sure. It does seem suspicious of her.
Yes, so he pops it in. And
then it cuts from static to the outside of their house.
And mind you, once this sort of like film is, I can't recall if it's in between or at the end of it, but regardless, there's a sigh of relief that comes from Renee from it. Just like, I guess it must just be like,
a real estate agent. Which is such a weird takeaway because, real estate agents, they're known for like standing outside your door and taking really creepy handheld footage, zooming in on your doors and your windows, and then it just cuts.
Send you the blank tape.
Yeah, for the 15-second shot of the outside of your house, ominously, with no speaking at all. That's it.
I get at least 3 a week.
So that's where it's like, again, if she is hiding something, that's a really like bad like defense of it. But it does seem, again, it's very hand wavy. Like, again, I'm just thinking of the situation playing out in real life. Just the reaction of, must be a real estate agent. Let's move on with our lives.
By the way, you said that like a lot of this furniture was David Lynch's, right?
Yeah. Well, he designed a lot of it and handpicked it. And all that stuff.
Do you think his is the giant triangle block and the giant square block that lift up his TV?
I want to believe so. And then later another videotape arrives, and this time it starts off with the outside of the house. Then it goes
Before we go into this house, the character we see is more unhinged. His hair is like more greasy. It's more under well kept. It seems like they may have woke up in the morning, but still, regardless.
For Fred?
Yes, for Fred, yes. It like poorly made hair. Like there was dogs barking outside. Apparently that woke up Renee, and still, but Fred is just more harsh at this point, just being like very to the point, and he's just like, well, let's just throw it in. And this is where like you see the active distance between them sitting on the couch. There is a more, I wouldn't say violent, but more intense atmosphere between them. Yeah. As far as this intensity goes, before we get another VHS tape with the same shot going deeper deeper, if you will.
Right, this time inside the house and almost hovering over the rooms like a drone. Eventually, before going into the bedroom while they're in bed, it's not quite clear enough to see from that second VHS tape what's happening in the bedroom, but it's enough that Renee is going to call the police now.
It looks to me, if you will, that there are two bodies separated in the bed, so I'm assuming going forward they're sleeping.
Yes. Considering that what the next tape will likely reveal, it's scary.
Which, by the way,
Spooky.
with the third and final VHS tape, the biggest difference. Casual inside the morning, very unkempt in the morning. This is the tape in which he is alone. He finds the tape.
Renee's not there.
Renee's not there. Doesn't talk to Renee, but he's actually well dressed. He's got slick back hair. He is someone who looks like he's like
in control.
In control. Or like, visiting a little red room, if you will. Guys, you look really nice in your overall attire. But
you got really jealous of me being Kermit last time, didn't you?
Clearly. Regardless.
Kalil-ry.
But this is where it gets very wild in the
At
use
heart.
of static at color, if you will. Because now that we return to the bedroom from the overall tapes, it is now drenched in blood. The sheets have been torn off the bed. He sits before her.
I like how
in
you focus on the
panic
sheets
states.
before the body parts.
I think it's
The
important.
sheets are all messed up.
I think it's important.
It is important, but also so are the hacked limbs. Renee's been hacked to pieces, like severed in half, limbs on the bed, everything's awful. And I think what's interesting also is that Fred is looking up to the camera.
Yes.
So it's like he sees it. He's looking straight up at it, which does make you wonder, what is he looking at? What is
he looking
the camera?
at before suddenly there's another flash of light before he's punched in the nose by the detectives.
The
from earlier.
orgasm of being punched in the face.
As he's comes back to reality itself and just is shaken. He says, I didn't kill her.
Yeah, because the detective yells, sit down, killer. The immediate sit down killer before the denial. So are we kind of proceeding at this moment with the idea that the murder did happen?
The murder did happen, yes.
Yeah, so he did kill Renee.
He did kill Renee.
Okay. That is most likely the case.
That is very, very likely the case in my perception.
I think this movie is subjective enough and is open enough that you can find readings of the film where he did not kill Renee. You could probably find readings of the film where Renee doesn't exist. You could find readings of the film however you want to suit it. And I think that there's more than most of the Lynch films we've seen, it's a little amorphous. But I'm kind of with you, Professor. I think he most likely did kill her. And when I look at even the stuff that has been said by Lynch or other people, it seems pretty much leaning on the idea that, yep, it's about a dude who killed his wife, and he's in denial about it. Because even Lynch will admit that much. And the thing with Lynch is that he never gives it away. So for Lynch even to go as far in interviews to say yep, it's about a guy who killed his wife, it makes me feel like the mystery is much deeper than that.
He learned from Twin Peaks, so he's trying to say, no, this is the golden goose, as he stuffs the real golden goose.
He's no longer worried about the
bed.
killer being hidden. We're going to give the killer away right away. The killer's not the mystery.
Or he's hiding it under the bed.
Yeah.
Just stay there. They won't go after you if they can't find you.
I imagine the golden goose aspect, though, is for television more than for movies for Lynch, because, you have to sustain a show over months and years. A movie, once you got him sitting in that theater seat, they've already paid.
So it's not the golden goose, it's the golden duck then.
The golden duck. Pacing. Rapid pacing at this point. We rush to the trial. We find the jury, found the defendant, Fred, guilty of murder in the first degree.
Well, we didn't
sentenced
find
to
it. That
death
was
in the electric
skipped.
chair. We hear it, though.
We hear it.
We hear it. He's sentenced to death in the electric chair. Again, room for doubt, room for questioning. Electricity, the idea of shocking white lights, potentially of being fried from an electric chair.
Yeah.
Could play an element. I mean, we don't ever see him being put in the chair and electrocuted, but we have seen white lights and violent shaking from Fred. So could this all be like a death dream?
Could be.
Could be. I actually think there's a way, again, to read that. We just don't ever see him being put in a chair. So maybe. Actually, it's the violent shaking that makes me think it's a possibility. But any hoozles.
Yeah, because there actually is a point where there's flashing lights and that violent shaking.
So that's, again, interesting. Fred is taken to a cell. And judging by the numbers on his shirt, he is prisoner 47516. When you add those numbers together, that's 23. Does that mean anything?
That's the number 23. Congratulations.
Who knows? I do not know if that means anything.
It's the number.
I'm just thinking of numbers. If they add up, and I'm like, that's a number. It adds up.
I feel like unless like you got something there, Kalil.
Well, okay, but like the population of Twin Peaks.
Find something to add up.
But when you add up
Kalil.
the Twin Peaks population, that adds up to 9, and that mattered.
How again?
We don't know. David Lynch thought it mattered, though.
Excuse you. Then if we don't have a conclusion,
Okay,
we
but
got
David
numbers.
David Lynch thought it all adding up to 9 mattered enough that he told people on the Twin Peaks set about it adding up to 9. So for all we know, the number 23 being added up matters too. Every single number in every single David Lynch work has to mean something.
It means you have been met with madness.
No,
friend.
and I want to be clear. I don't think it means anything. But there is a large contingent of David Lynch fans who look at numerology and look at numbers. And it pays off sometimes, I think. I do think that there are some things that are on purpose, even by Lynch's own confirmation, or by likelihood. There are things in the text that, yes, some numbers may be significant. No, I don't think this one is. I mostly just wanted to toy with you.
When it pays off.
This is
Rather
paying
than
off
just
right
letting
now.
me know.
I think your reaction is
Give
paying
me
off.
the bill.
I've given you the bill and you've paid in fine details.
We need to give me the bill of something of substance to myself instead of taking from my soul.
I will give you the bill of the golden duck. Some point later, Fred starts experiencing head pains in prison. Lots of fade-outs to black. Not white, fade-outs to black. Transitioning to these scenes. We have doctors inspecting him, ask him if he's sleeping okay. He just shoves him some unknown beverage medicine of some kind. And he's like, yeah, he'll sleep now. We're going to be good. Take him back to the cell. And we cut then to Fred desperately calling for a guard. Really not looking good. One of the few jokes in the movie is exchanged at this point, that one of the officers says to the other that the wife killer's looking real bad. And the other cop jokes back, which one? So that's comedy in this movie.
Congratulations,
I
you
like
accomplished comedy.
I like it because it's dark comedy to the extent that it's not really funny. It's just like,
I can only imagine some people just try to find some humor when working at this job.
this job. So Fred is vibing in his cell. He's just
Vibing? Yeah, sure.
kind of vibing in there.
Mhm.
And we get this interesting image at one point of a rickety wooden house or a shed on fire. And the fire is reversed. The smoke is reversed.
Yep.
It's going back into the house to the point that the fire eventually retracts, the house reassembles, appearing before the explosion. The mystery man walks out, and this is the moment of turning point. Before we get to this turning point, there is that question then of, well, what's the significance of seeing the shed and the fire in the house now? Because we have not seen it as a viewer up to this point.
Yes.
Presumably Fred has not seen this shack, as far as we know. Would there be any reason for Fred to have known this place?
To have just known this place? I don't think it's an actual place.
Okay, so we don't believe there's like a physical place that he's been to with this visual.
No, I think that it is a tense location in which that it seems like something before a great incident, if you will, adding to the atmosphere of, oh gods, what's going to happen here? It's a tense thematic location that does not physically exist, I believe.
And that becomes an interesting point of where you're headed, I believe, based on the fact that we do see that location later in the film.
We do.
Visiting a familiar place.
Visiting a place that doesn't exist, yes.
It's like in Kingdom Hearts 1, you see the Disney Castle world always on the periphery of the world map outside of Traverse Town, or Traverse Town, depending on your dialect. And then in Kingdom Hearts 2, you actually go to the Disney Castle.
Yeah, but this is as if there's no Kingdom Hearts 2. It's just that you go there.
You've hacked your way into the Matrix. So, yeah, we get him to return after the fire's gone in and the mystery man walks out, and Fred is immersed in blue light. And we cut to this visual of driving down the lost highway. And the man is a man on the highway. Name is Pete. We're going to find his name out later. He is standing there, and this light is flashing on him. And then suddenly, after just cutting to this random highway scene, transformation ensues in the cell. Side note. The sequence where Fred transforms into Pete was not computer-generated, but rather was accomplished with in-camera techniques as follows. A makeup expert constructed a fake head that was covered with artificial brain matter, which was then intercut with shots of Pullman, the actor. The final car chase, by the way, also, was shot with 2 different cameras running at 2 different frame rates. There you go. The more you know.
The more you know.
Oh, and then the footage was sped up to make the scene more aggressive, which appreciated. Much. I think the visual effects team did a good job.
The visual effects team did an amazing job. I think that there's just like this horrifying visage that they end up seeing in this
very
moment.
well. It ages very well. It's not quite Jacob's Ladder levels of distortion, but it is very well done. And if it had been like computer generated, it probably would not age very well from 1997 to now.
Probably not.
But this was good.
Unlike like the image of the vampire in the face of Renee, in which has aged lightly. Because that's one of the faces that we actually got to see beforehand. That's a delicious little face.
Speaking of the Mystery Man, let us talk about the Mystery Man. We have
vampire.
Conveniently not talked about him very much yet.
Yes.
But now that Pete is entering and Fred is exiting stage left or stage right, let's talk about him.
Let's talk about him.
So there's some background on the actor we have to discuss.
Okay.
In 2002, David Lynch, this is about 5 years after the film was made.
Yes.
5 years later, he said that he only recently had realized what subconsciously had inspired the film. So take it with a boulder of salt, because this is 5 years later. Lynch is like, I think I figured it out. This is what I'm pretty sure I meant. He thinks that it was inspired by the O.J. Simpson trial. Lynch said that the trial was a major influence on his mind during the stage of writing the script, which deals with a man who has been accused of killing his wife. Possible. The O.J. Simpson trial was everywhere. From what I understand, again, I was a literal child. I did not understand anything. I would have been confused by Blue's Clues at that age.
Same. We were children.
Curiously enough, Lynch cast Robert Blake to play the Mystery Man, who was then a major character in the film. This is the thing that you probably don't know.
Okay.
Several years later, Blake was put on trial on accusations of killing his own wife.
Oh.
Yeah.
Huh.
So the actor who plays the Mystery Man, who, depending on your interpretation, either encourages the guy to kill his wife or is the embodiment or manifestation of his motivation to kill his wife, either way, very much aligned with killing wife, was played by an actor who a few years later would be accused of such things. So, Robert Blake was found not guilty of murdering his wife, Bonnie Lee Bakley, but was later found liable for her wrongful death, which resulted in enough fees that he ended up filing for bankruptcy. As of current date, which is supposed to be February 2022, but I put it as February 20,202. I added an extra 2 at the end. So, as of February 20,222, this remains Robert Blake's last film appearance. He has never been in a film after this Lost Highway movie.
What a way to exit the acting world.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I hope he didn't murder his wife.
I hope so, but there's still a dead person at the end of the day.
I mean, is it still awful?
It is.
It is insane that this happened with the actor who is this character. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, how do you think the actor did? How good of a job do you think the actor did portraying the myth?
I'm just gonna put this. This is not a reflection on the person or the well-being or whoever this person is outside of the realm of acting.
Yeah.
So when I say that I thoroughly enjoyed this person's performance, we're keeping it in the realm of this character.
Look, a lot of it's the makeup. Fantastic work to make him not goofy looking, because it's a case where if you overdo the white and the spooky looking, he's just gonna look like he walked out of a Halloween store.
It's the makeup, it's the pace of his lines overall.
Yes, it's the way he speaks is pretty normal. It's not super distorted, but it's just a little off. It's just a little off.
The reason why I refer to him as a vampire, it's that offness. I get a sort of American tone speaking Bela Lugosi really. Is someone that just he can stand inside of a room and it's very clear on where it's a very clear disruption in the atmosphere.
It's very uncanny. If I had to guess, put one word on what his portrayal does, it borders on that uncanny. I think it's again subtle enough to work, but in your face enough to be jolting when he first shows up at the party, because he appears from a distance, just kind of casually in the background. So before we get to the party, though, there is an earlier appearance of this man's face, as you were alluding to with the graphics. So Fred talks to Renee about a dream that he had the previous night, and this is when they're in bed together. And he says, you were inside the house. And he's like breathing. You were calling my name. And then there's a loud crackling of the fireplace. I couldn't find you. And there's like foggy smoke lifting and the red curtains.
Smoke.
And there you were, lying in bed. It wasn't you. It looked like you, but it wasn't. He looms over. She screams, ah! He looks over in bed after waking up from the dream, but he's not actually woken up from the dream, because in the dream, he woke up from the dream, and then her face is in the darkness, and now it's a mystery man over her face.
Yep. It is the mystery man over her face, and it is someone who is just staring down at him. Almost like, it's very interesting that he's lying down and she looks over, in almost like that same sort of like line of sight later on the cameras.
It's very power dynamics. Again, all about power dynamics. Who's making eye contact, who's looking up, who's looking down.
Regardless, this is still Fred's dream, though.
This is still Fred's dream within a dream, if we're to believe the narrative here. That he thought he woke up from the dream, but he was still actually dreaming the whole time. That might be significant for what you believe.
We live inside a dream.
Hell, God, baby, damn no?
Exactly.
Exactly. Jeffries was on to something. So, Professor, do you mind if I reveal a little bit of your hand? I mean, I've kind of been alluding to it, but you haven't stated it.
I will slap you.
Okay.
You
You made a comment off pod. We talk a lot off pod, believe it or not, listeners.
It's a slap.
And you made a comment about the mystery man representing doubt.
It's as someone who, at the party, when approaching this individual, he comes up and says, we've seen each other before, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very interesting way to introduce yourself, or just like be present, or at any point, like say for example, Kalil, if I came into the house and said, we've seen each other before, right? Like when you like make that assumption, it seems like it's trying to guide something.
I don't think. Okay, I'm gonna
so
defend the
weird.
mystery man for a moment. I think it's not that weird. If you're at a party and someone's like, okay, imagine if it wasn't in the tone of this man. Okay, that's the first thing. If someone just ran to a party like, hey, we've met before, haven't we? That's a pretty normal thing to say at someone at a party.
It's a horrible thing to say at the party because, hey, hear me out. If you have met someone before and you can't address them directly, being like, hey, Fred. Or it's like, hey, man.
They might just casually met. Like maybe they were at a party and they saw each other with some other friends or something.
This man does not party. I promise you, this is not the party man.
Out of context, it's a normal thing to say. In context, look who's saying it and hear how he's saying it.
Regardless, this is where sort of like Fred sort of like hand waves him off, just like, yeah, nah, I don't think so, bud. But and then he just humors it. It's like, where do you think we met?
Mm-hmm.
And it was something along the lines of, in your house.
Mm-hmm.
You invited me in.
As a matter of fact, I'm there right now.
It's like, right, buddy, okay. He's like, here.
Call me.
Call me. Your number.
So, and this is also where, noting for trivia, I didn't catch it, but apparently you could tell by the way the number's being punched in that his phone number ends with 666. I'm glad it wasn't obvious because it's such a corny thing because it's been overdone. It's been overdone, but I'm glad that it's subtle enough that you have to be really looking for it. Then I'm okay with it.
It's that's just fun. But yeah, he types in his phone number and he's just like, he answers on the other side. Mm-hmm. And the conversation just sort of like casually continues between all of them. Himself at the house, as well as Fred, erupts into laughter before he ends up walking away. It's recognizing that it's someone who has been invited in, and if we were to take this character as metaphor,
mm-hmm.
as it's not too much of a leap to say that could be done in a film such as this, I do strongly feel it's doubt. It's
mm-hmm.
around this point at the start of the film that we're getting more and more creaking doubt on the overall abilities in the relationship, on like his overall beliefs in his wife and what life that she ends up leading, if you will. What sort of like things that she is up to. Doubt creeps in.
No, I think it's an excellent read. I think it's very, very good. I will also note to simultaneously, I wouldn't say argue against, but like maybe punch a little bit of a hole for you to respond to.
Please.
While also giving you a compliment at the same time.
Punch me with your compliments.
The mystery man says that he does not go. It's not his custom to go where he isn't wanted. So if it's doubt, does that mean he wanted the doubt? And then the second thing, if he's a vampire, you're correct, because vampires have to be let in. That's where the whole let the right one in, that movie comes in. It makes perfect sense. You have to let the vampire into your house.
It's something in which it's when you are sunk into doubt, you aren't taking the steps around it or working your ways with the doubt. There's no communication or external forces that he's trying to solve the problem. It's more so he's seeking out the problem itself. He's letting the doubt fester inwards and welcomes it in, because at the end of the day, he's so confident in like his result and his abilities on like perceiving the situation that this has to be the only answer. It's part of the line, which I'll probably bring up multiple times here. I like to remember things my own way, how I remember them, not necessarily how they happened. The truth doesn't matter. It's how he perceives his reality.
So in what way do you think then, just to clarify, that he invited doubt? Like he wanted doubt?
If he chooses his own personal truth rather than truth in general, he is not looking for those. He's not trying to kick out doubt at all. He's letting it into his home and letting it stay there because it facilitates his worldview.
So do you think that the movie's criticizing that worldview of trying to form your own version of things rather
if
than
it ends up with killing your wife, yeah, I think it's a big critique.
Here's where things get weird then, is that I wasn't planning to bring this up because I just thought it was kind of whatever, but now it's become relevant. In some of the trivia sources I was looking at, verifiable to whatever degree, we're stating that Lynch has said that this idea about the recording and whatever and the truth and the memory, that is based on Lynch's own reason why he doesn't like home cameras and stuff and photos like that. He prefers to remember things how he wants to remember them, not how they actually happened. So he basically in that moment was taking his own opinions and putting them in the words of the wife murderer.
Yeah.
So
it's not a great insight.
That's what I mean though, is like, is David Lynch like, is he doing... Is David Lynch using his own ideas about a real-world cameras and preserving memories versus, making them and blah, 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 to then dramatize it in Crazy Land where it murders people?
I think that he takes things that he loves passionately, and I don't think that he's away from twisting it or taking it towards other ends of hyperbole.
Yeah.
Because he says that he loves machines and he loves sort of like the mechanical feels of them, but at no point can I remember a positive thing coming out of machines from David Lynch's work. It's that fun sort of take that he's able to take that joy and then twist it into an interesting narrative.
That's fair. And by the way, the Robert Blake, the actor who played this character, he said in interviews prior when the movie came out that he did not understand what he was doing. Like, he basically followed the instructions, kind of went with what David Lynch was guiding, but he interpreted the character as being the devil. Like, that's what he has said. Like, he played it as though he is Satan. Which, if we take the 666 number thing seriously, if we take the idea that he only comes when he's invited, you could start to form how the devil would work. It's just, I think that the moment I take it that literally, it loses some of the appeal for me as a viewer. This is a movie where a guy makes a pact with the devil and kills his wife. It feels very like, okay, we've all been there. We've all seen it before. We've heard it before. Let's come up with some new material, guys. So I like to believe doubt much more than literal devil.
I find that the perception of this individual present throughout this film and also present with Fred. I think that this is where I lean so heavily that this film is Fred's perspective one way or another. Like, whether it is from the sense of his own personal memory or his own mind on how things go. I think that this is Fred's film.
I also, on that note, I think it kind of connects. I really enjoy how at the party when he talks to the mystery man, the music like very quickly gets dialed down.
And then fades, thick fade.
Very quickly. And then when he leaves, the funky music comes back.
Yes.
Which makes it feel in sort of like a metatextual way that like the film is slowing, stopping, pausing to let this encounter happen, and then normalcy returns right after. But it does feel like there's some control this mystery man has over this moment. Either he's controlling it or someone else is controlling it. Either way, things are being messed with in the reality of the film. The music was diegetic, right? The music was meant to be played at the party, so it shouldn't just suddenly stop and turn back on for this one conversation. I would imagine everyone else at the party just would stop dancing then, and it would be just really confusing, like, why'd the music stop? No, everyone else around is still treating it like the party's normal.
It mutes between the two of them.
Yeah.
Yes. This
Either
would be a point.
Either us or those two.
I think it also can lean into those two because the fact is he speaks at such a register that would be hard to hear in a party. It's just really like, here, call me. It's like, what? Call me. Do you need me to dial a cab, sir? I don't have anything. Have a nice night, sir. Take care. Goodbye.
So fair enough. So either way, I really like that element of it. And I guess, like I said, it could play into that idea that if it is filtered through Fred's perspective, the fact that the film even will bend the audio to what Fred can really register at that moment. Interesting indeed. So Fred, though, he's old news. We're now in Pete land.
Yeah, he doesn't exist.
Yeah. Fred is to the night what Pete Dayton is to the day, and we are at the sunshiny new character. Actor is Balthazar Getty. I know almost nothing about Balthazar Getty. I've heard the name because it's a very memorable name.
Kalil,
Balthazar
it's
Getty.
your job to research this.
Yeah, sure. So, in all seriousness, I mostly hand wave these as a joke, but in all seriousness, I don't want to get bogged down in too much. If there's something I find is trivia that's interesting about the film, for example, with Wild at Heart, the fact that Laura Dern was literally, her mom was her mom in the movie. That's wild. But otherwise, I don't look into their whole filmographies and get all in, because Professor, we talk about these movies enough.
We do.
Lot. We are a thorough podcast.
I just think that the
You come in here
secondary protagonist
you expect
would
me
be
to
important
bring
enough.
up. What do you want to know about Balthazar Getty?
What's his favorite
Okay,
food?
Okay, ask me questions. I'm gonna make up fake answers.
Okay.
None of these are correct.
Okay, how did he start getting into film?
He actually is the son of Marlon Brando.
And how was he introduced to David Lynch? How did he get introduced to this sort of end of filmography?
He accidentally punched David Lynch and Wendy's line once when they were both trying to get the last available Frosty at the Wendy's. There's only one Frosty left, and Balthazar Getty gave him the classic Balthazar punch, as he calls it, and knocked David Lynch out. David Lynch had a flash of white, and then when David Lynch shot back up, he's like, I want you in my movie.
And as far as his time with this overall role, how did he feel about it? How did this impact him?
Constant diarrhea. Unstoppable. Every shot with Balthazar Getty, immediately after the camera went cut, he ran to the bathroom.
This poor kid, you decide that...
Poor kid. He's older than we are.
He's older than we
are. He can get over it.
At the time, though, we're talking about this guy. Who, you've decided, he's just a random assaulter at Wendy's and has constant diarrhea.
And he's the son of Marlon Brando.
Out of all... I don't think that's an insult.
No, it's
Marlon
a good
Brando.
thing. It's a good thing. I think. I don't know. Probably. I'm going to say it's a good thing for my narrative. Let's do this more often. We'll just make up things on a Wonderful and Strange podcast. You're never going to know what's true and what's not true. It's very meta.
You're very much worsening the quality of our podcast actively. You dare sabotage it this late in the game.
Now we're going to begin the cell saga, i.e. the very brief time where Balthazar Getty's Pete is in a cell.
Neat. Good pun.
The guard checks on Fred, but it's not Fred anymore. It's Pete Dayton, just chilling in there. The guard has no idea who this is. Says it's real spooky. And Pete looks up, kind of looks roughed up. He's got kind of bruises on his face. And for quite a long time in the movie, we really don't get any dialogue from Pete. We just kind of are lingering with the fact that our protagonist in heavy quotes, has shifted. Our focus character has shifted here. On his file that they pull up at the police stuffs here, he lives on Garland Avenue. You want to do anything with that?
After he left the Briggs.
He was 19 years old.
He lives there.
He was 19 years old and he was arrested for auto theft and then had a 1-year probation, and now he's 24 years old. And at first I was kind of confused if 4 years were missing then, or if I just misunderstood because he's or 5, it was 19 plus the 1, how's he 24 now? But there's no time lost, right? Am I just crazy? It's just a fact of he had the 1-year probation and then he was living normally for a few years and then just suddenly disappeared less than a week ago, right?
Yeah.
So I at first was thinking he was missing for 4 years, and it's no, he's missing for a day or two.
Yeah.
Yeah?
If he was real, yes.
If he was real. We're going to operate under this reality right now.
Yep, this reality, which is fake.
Pete is returned home. Officers keep an eye out because this is real weird. And those officers are just going to keep hanging around a lot during this.
They're always present, the eyes of the law, always looking upon this person.
Yeah, just wait till the Patriot Act comes in. You can solve a lot of these problems without having to have real cops following all the time.
Fake real cops.
Yes, because everything's fake. His extremely 90s friends show up and ask where he's been.
They just show up to his house, you see. They actively go to him.
Yes.
Talk to him and grab him.
Yes.
Like, in a friendly way, not like we pick you up out of the bed, you're coming with us, good times. So I just want to make it clear, they come for him.
Yeah. Also, one of these friends is Scott Coffey! Woo! Put some air horns in here in the edit, okay?
No.
Put some air horns in here.
No.
Scott Coffey!
No, here's the thing. You put in your own hair horns.
Hair horns.
Put in your own hair horns.
My own hairy horns.
And layer them. It's like you go ahead and just make yourself a orchestra of your own mouth sounds.
Scott Coffey. Okay, so the low-key short version of this is that Scott Coffey is this minor element in the background of David Lynch's productions. I believe this is his first appearance in the credits of anything with David Lynch, I'm pretty sure. He will continue to be a minor element in the next few films. I think he's in Mulholland Drive. He's in, I think, Inland Empire very briefly. I think. I don't know if it's in the cast or the crew, but he's there, I think. And then, around that time, he, like, in between Mulholland Drive and Inland Empire, he made a movie with Naomi Watts called Ellie Parker that is just, like, the visual quality of Inland Empire with its, like, digital camera stuff, but instead of being, like, 3 hours of psychological horror like Inland Empire, it's, like, a weird comedy about Naomi Watts as a struggling actor, and Scott Coffey's, like, naked at one point, and Scott Coffey just gives me, like, you know, great feelings inside. I like Scott Coffey. You know, I look at Scott Coffey in these films and I'm like, here is a man who just was having the time of his life working with the legend David Lynch. It gives me like Notice Me Senpai kind of vibes, you know? And if Scott Coffey's listening, I just want you to know that I appreciate what you're doing. I hope you're up to good things. I can't wait to see another like weird almost Lynch thing you make at some point. Because like Ellie Parker was verging on Inland Empire, but not at all. But because it's so unlike it, it feels like the right kind of prequel. It's like the unofficial prequel to Inland Empire. I respect Ellie Parker. I respect you, Scott Coffey. Woo! Air horns! Air horns!
You chose guns.
I chose guns.
Your air horns are guns.
Yeah, man. That's how much I'm approving of Scott Coffey.
Scott Coffey, I don't know you, and I have no context towards your overall well-being in life, but I hope you're having a nice day.
Anyway, Pete, his parents are watching some extremely 50s documentary thing on the TV. You know, like as much as his friends are extremely 90s.
Your bucket.
Theirs is extremely 50s, and it says it would do him some good to go out with his friends. And like aside from that one documentary, this movie doesn't have a lot of 50s in it compared to a lot of other Lynch work. It doesn't feel like it's steeped in that sort of nostalgia that Lynch oftentimes dabbles in from that time period. So yeah, he goes with his friends, and they go to the bowling alley that then connects to a dance party, I guess. And they're dancing in this red light when his at the time I wasn't sure if it was a girlfriend. I thought it was just like a female friend, but Sheila, right? And she says he's been acting strange ever since the other night, and he's like, I don't remember anything. And then she asks if he still cares about her, and he answers with a kiss. He answers with the physicality of his care. Again, something you can kind of do with that, with the idea that, you know, earlier Fred was unable to really physically satisfy his wife, really not able to show full affection. And this time for this younger character, this more, I don't know, let's say virile character. Is that not weird to say? I don't know. This character is, like you said before, a little more physically affectionate with his girlfriend here. He's able to answer her with that affection.
Yes, it's a form of physical affection towards this one person. While he is having a hard time with memory and has a giant, what seems to be dent in his head, yes.
And then later, the girl and he go for a drive and do sex things, and the officers watch.
Yep, and it's an act of sex. They do the sex.
They do.
There's sex.
Also, Pete works at Arnie's Complete Car Service, which feels like a really random and unimportant element of the story, with the exception of the fact that it connects him with main characters.
Yes, and he just goes in and he approaches Mr. Smith, if you will, at his job. And it seems like Mr. Smith kind of almost guides the dialogue a little bit more, if you will. Almost just like surprised that he's there, interested in work. He's just ready to work. All right, let's work.
Pete is back!
Pete's back, and to get in contact with Mr. Eddie again. It seems like this person is someone able to fix things very easily because he's got quite the knack and ear for it, if you will.
Yes.
He's a very aspiring young man with a hardworking job and many talents in mind, if you will. Looks like everything's going well for him.
Yes, and eventually Mr. Eddie comes around and they go for a drive, and we'll circle back to that later.
Yeah.
They just go for a drive.
They go for a
for
drive.
right now, uneventful drive.
You want to go for a ride?
Later, we see him working more on the cars, and Jack Nance is there. Jack Nance.
Is this for every single actor
No.
that we're going to pass by?
No,
Which
just the
we're
ones
gonna
that
have
just
so
the ones that
many
I want to.
fanfares.
It's the one that I want to. This was tone shift, serious shift here. This was Jack Nance's final appearance in a Lynch project,
I see.
and it was his final acting role before his tragic death. So, not so much the air horns anymore. Genuinely, really tragic death. And I mentioned this, I believe, I want to say in like a previous pod. I want to say it was in a look back. His cause of death is really weird. So, from what we understand, it was from injuries sustained during a fight that he had at like this place. It was a donut shop or restaurant or something. Like there was this fight that broke out.
Okay.
And it was really, really weird. And he was only like 53 when it happened. Yeah, and the film was released a month later. So Lost Highway was released like a month after Jack Nance passed away from these injuries that were sustained.
Oh.
Yeah,
That
it's
is
extremely mysterious circumstances. Enough so that like former cast member Michael J. Anderson, from what I've read, had accused David Lynch of like killing Jack Nance
Oh.
in an especially like weird comment.
Okay.
And there's been other things that Michael J. Anderson has alleged at certain points. I don't dig much into it, I guess, not because I'm not doing my research, but because I just don't necessarily always want to get bogged down in the he said, she said of weird allegations and such. But there does appear to be some animosity toward and between Michael J. Anderson and David Lynch that has resulted in some rather strange allegations that I don't think have any merit. From what I can gather and from what everyone else is saying, David Lynch and Jack Nance were very close, and that Jack Nance's passing would have been an incredible sadness for David Lynch. He'd always worked with him in every project he can get Jack Nance involved in.
Okay.
So, I have no doubt that if Jack Nance had been around for it, he would have been in Mulholland Drive, right? He would have been in Inland Empire somehow. But unfortunately, this was around that time that he passed. So, yeah.
That's sad.
Jack Nance's role is pretty small in this movie. I don't even remember the character's name, really, but he works at the auto repair shop, and Pete is working on vehicles, and there's this like saxophone music playing in the background, and Pete becomes clearly like disoriented by it or bothered by it.
I'm already kind of getting disoriented right now because Jack Nance with a character named Pete.
Yeah, it's kind of
right
weird.
together. It's hard to not like.
Yeah,
I'm unwinding this actively
I
in my
understand.
brain.
But yeah, Pete is basically like out of breath, like frustrated. Clearly, it took a toll of him. So he like gets up and he turns the station away from the saxophone. And Jack Nance's character is all like, "I liked that. Why are you changing my music?" and that's, I believe, like one of the last times we see him. We do see him later also when he sees a woman he finds attractive, kind of remarking on it. Otherwise, it's mostly a background element, a little bit of flavor for the car shop, the car dealership. It's at this same location of Arnie's Complete Car Service that Pete, and alongside Pete, us, meet our new, in quotation marks with asterisks, italicized, bolded, and underlined, our new character of Alice Wakefield.
Yes.
And so she appears with Mr. Eddie in his black Cadillac.
She looks familiar.
She looks awfully familiar. She's in like the background. I really like how it's done. She's in the background, kind of almost like a little bit blurry. Mr. Eddie's in the foreground. And then after Mr. Eddie does step aside, we get the full-on view of Alice Wakefield, played by a blonde Patricia Arquette, the same actor who played Renee earlier in the film.
Okay.
Which it feels very much like a love at first sight sort of moment. We get the music playing very, very abruptly. as this is kind of ensuing of this sort of slow-mo, very drawn out, her like leaving the car and kind of like camera just fixated on her and getting Pete's a little bit reactions from it. So he just immediately smitten with the character of Alice Wakefield.
It is most certainly a very fun, mystical moment between the two, especially with not even probably about 10 minutes from the sex scene with the other girlfriend.
I do think what really propels this moment for the viewer is the I don't know, I guess you almost say dramatic irony, but like us knowing that this actor is the same one as Renee. When we're watching this unfold, we're probably feeling a little bit of a different sense of emotions than he is if he's just like smitten with the love at first sight. However, at the same time, we don't know what Pete is thinking, and Pete does have flashes of memories of Fred. So, you know, when Pete looks at her, does he think she's familiar or not? Does he recognize? Does any part of him recognize? Because it's unclear at first, at least, right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
We'll go with
the
that.
viewers are mainly going to be thinking probably.
The viewers maybe, if they recognize her or not, I don't know.
I think most viewers would recognize the actor, yes.
Stop looking at me that way.
Professor, I don't mean to do this to you, but you did.
It sounds like you do mean to do this to me.
Off pod, you did not recognize that this was the same actor as Renee.
Listen, listeners who also
maybe over time you might have figured it out. Okay, now you're doubting yourself.
Listeners, if you have the same experience such as me, where it's sometimes difficult to recognize faces, know you're valid. And you don't have to take nonsense from people like Kalil.
You're the one who just brought up that people may not recognize, so I'm just...
May not. So, like, maybe I didn't.
That's okay. But, like, I don't mention, like, oh, someone may not hear this because they're deaf. I don't have to mention that every movie because yes, people have different experiences of media, but the vast majority don't have that experience.
If let's get a poll going then. If you happen to recognize faces very well, go ahead and email us at snakeeyedreams@gmail.com or tweet at us at snakeeyedreams1, the numeral 1, as in
one actor playing two characters. And may I say, your criteria for recognizing faces very well is recognizing the same face of the same person with just a different color wig.
Yes.
Okay, just to clarify.
I'm just saying that it's hard for me. I'm not the only one.
No, I don't doubt that you are.
I'm just saying, I don't have... We need a poll.
Professor, I wasn't even going to bring this up, but then you said the thing.
I said the thing, and you could have dropped it.
I could have dropped it.
Don't.
And now I'm going to drop you. Anyway, moving on. Yeah, viewers are definitely probably going to be thinking, probably going to be thinking like, wow, it's the same actor who played that character earlier. Is this like the same person? Did that Renee character actually die? What's happening? We don't know if Pete's thinking anything at all beyond pretty lady. What's going on? Who knows?
He's still waking up from a
Alice
dream,
Wakefield. The fact that her name is Wakefield. And the fact that his name is Pete Dayton. Wake.
Wake, Day. We got an Alice here.
Alice, a wonderland of sorts, one could say.
A wondrous name, and I agree.
Yes. Now, if we strip away
She's
those
blonde
elements...
too.
Yeah, if we strip away the elements that are a little bit more tying her to Renee, it is, again, like you said, only about 10 minutes after he's making out with his girlfriend, Sheila, he just sees some pretty lady at the place he works. Not only that, but like the girlfriend of the man who he's seen do normal things during a drive. We'll go back to that. Done normal things. So maybe, just maybe. Don't. Maybe don't. Have you considered not? She asks him if he wants to take her out to dinner, and he's like, I don't know, it's a good idea.
How about I take you to dinner?
And then he's like, well, that's a good idea.
Okay, well, I guess I'm just gonna call a cab.
No. I am the man. I will move my hand and grab the phone away from you and hang up the phone. And I will stare at you longingly. And you will stare at me longingly. And I will be the man who makes the worst idea happen. Because I am the stupid person. I am the person who pursues the love interest of Mr. Eddie. I have seen Mr. Eddie act normally in social encounters. And I am willing to risk it all for the sake of my one true love, who I have just now met.
Sex.
Alice says they skip the dinner and cut to them snacking on each other.
You did your best.
I did my best. And they're making out under mostly red light with like hints of blue going on, which forms like a purple. Would you believe purple and blue and red? The officers are commenting outside about this and how much sex this guy seems to have.
Sex.
And it ensues, and he gives her the phone number. And a lot of their relationship, as we see in the film, is just sexual encounters. Yeah, we don't have any like scenes of them affectionately going to a petting zoo or going mini golfing.
There's actually some...
Or jumping into a volcano.
No, it seems like constant sex. And there is even one scene where like he's getting very pent up and it's like he's very...
Hold on a second. I just realized all three of the examples I could use as sex jokes.
Good job.
He wants to put the ball in the hole. Like the mini golf.
We all know where we're going with all this.
He
gets pent up at one point.
He wants to pet with the petting zoo, and then he wants to, I don't know, experience the heat of the volcano or something.
Do you want to go into further detail, Kalil?
No. There's also a lot of things going on with fingernails. Where like sometimes Alice has white fingernails, sometimes Alice has black fingernails throughout the whole movie.
Which gets to my point with him getting pent up at one point and then going off to a hotel, which seems to be another sexual act, if you will, with Alice. But the most notable thing is that it's not blonde hair. Mm-hmm. It's a deep brown.
Mm-hmm. There's some blurring of the lines here.
There's some blurring of some lines here. So, as we are going into this smoothie of sex...
Excuse me. That sounds disgusting. You know what I'm thinking that means, and you know what the listener's thinking, and you have the audacity to judge me with my petting zoo joke, you over there with the mountain lion of sex jokes. By that I mean it snarls and it's vicious.
Regardless, this relationship is going on and on and on and more intense.
Yeah.
And yeah, I gotta say, it's not gonna work out so well for Pete in the long haul, especially with how his family and his lover are getting a little bit concerned. His ex-lover, as it seems. They just sit him down. And they're like, look. We're going to make things... This is very much paraphrasing. We're going to set things straight. We're not going to tell the cops anything about that. No matter what they say that they think that they know, we're not going to stick with that. As far as we're aware, you came home with Sheila. Mm-hmm. And you had another man with you, and I've never seen this man in my whole damn life. So the presence of this other being, who could it be?
So my mind goes immediately to the mystery man, right?
There's two people it could be.
One with the mystery man.
And the other one is who's actively inside of a vehicle, pulls over a vehicle, and stops in front of Pete at a later time or a sooner time. Time is not linear in this film.
Is it future? Is it past? Who knows?
Yes, regardless. So it's either the Pete or it is the vampire. I'm leaning to Pete.
Okay.
Mainly because...
I'm confused. Pete is Pete. You mean Fred?
Fred, yes.
Yeah.
The other Pete.
I mean, even saying Pete is a debatable argument, actually. Pete is Fred, maybe?
I don't believe Pete is Pete. I don't believe...
You think
I feel that the person who is Pete and the name is shouted out as Pete, there is a Pete out there. I think that Fred stops in front of a boy named Pete as Pete's name is yelled out.
Oh, okay. All right.
Because that's one scene that we have physically see as these sort of lights and incense go out, especially since later on Fred's driving away down the Lost Highway, and eventually we see a scene where during this highway it just turns and quickly stops in front of this kid who is Pete. So yes, that's my personal consensus right now, that I believe...
Personal consensus? So all of you has agreed to this.
That Fred had appeared before them inside this vehicle. Cops had followed after this instance, if you will. So cops had come to witness it. They're panicking and rushing towards him because there is a car revving right to this guy's general direction, the son as well as everyone. And this is a concerning situation, especially if cops are following along the way, and he's just standing there.
And he's previously had trouble with the law with that 1-year probation, so there is that concern. I guess this is where I'm a little bit lost. I lean more toward the mystery man. I think if it's Fred, it creates more questions in me than answers, I suppose. I'm not saying it's not possible. It definitely is still possible.
I don't believe this scene is actively there, but it's the thing that makes the most sense to me.
Because I guess I'm more lost between the Pete that's real and the Pete that's not real in your interpretation.
The Pete that's not real, I think that's still, like, these guys not knowing who Fred is, by Fred's own perspective, trying to put this narrative together in his head as he's sitting inside of a cell waiting for his next point in line to come up as he is getting actively drugged and doped up. I actively believe that all these sequences is just his brain rationalizing, like, his actions, the world around him. I don't think these Pete instances exist, because I think he's putting a story around Pete and making a narrative on what he believes reality is.
So
the saying goes, I like to remember things my own way, how I remember them, not necessarily how they happen.
So then, by that logic, just kind of taking some time here to parse that out. So your interpretation then is that Pete is someone that he had previously driven by on a highway, or is that happening in his mind?
This is at the end of the movie, where we see Fred is being chased, and Fred, in his moment, turns off to the side and sees Pete standing there, just standing there. There's a sharp turn where, like, Pete is in the headlights. That's where, at the end of the film, mind you, when he's driving away, I don't think he made a stop and let the cops come by. I think that with those shocking blue lights, that's the sort of, like, quote-unquote electric chair moment that's linking all this together. I think that's when he stops in front of this poor kid, and he is veering off the path in front of him.
Well, I guess I'm confused, though. Isn't the car chase in his head, though? That's not a real thing.
I think the car chase for Fred is real. I think that after, like, he was caught, if you will.
But he was, like, in his house when he was detained.
He was detained in a location. I don't fully believe that it's his house when he gets punched in the face.
I thought it was.
It's the curtains make it difficult to tell at the bookshelf, because I hadn't seen those any other location. It seems like they had taken him to the Brig house at that point.
Yeah, I guess I'm still on the assumption that's his house, so the chase scene wouldn't make a lot of sense to be real.
Why would you interrogate him inside of his home? That's just bad etiquette at this point. But that might just be like a thematically interesting place. I believe that they took him, interrogated him at their location.
Okay.
So, in the meantime, he kills off whichever one in whichever order. I believe that he kills off Dick first before he kills off his wife.
Okay.
And then after that, ensuing, and still this perspective is where some, like, physical scenes are skewed.
So this is very interesting.
He escapes, and the end of the line is when he stopped in front of this kid. I'll finish off, actually, my theory right now, because just to try to make sense of this whole entire thing right
Yeah, this is interesting, because I'm already kind of seeing where I agree and where I don't agree, so this is interesting.
So after he's been, like, chased and caught down and detained, the last thing that he sees is this very intense moment where he nearly runs over a kid, something that might stick inside of his head at that sort of point. So when he's stuck inside of the cell and just, like, this sort of, like, dream comes to his mind, if you will, like, oh no, Pete's somehow here and we need to drag him out. No, I think his brain is rationalizing, this is a kid that met someone named Alice, another reality, another person, if you will, and that person had seduced him in her own way, that there's this other life that this Alice person was living, if you will, and just bringing in these sort of, like, people inside of her life. I think that his doubts when it concerned Renee is trying to rationalize itself out and just make him out more of someone more tragic, if you will, that she is this person that he can hardly ever know, how he can never hold on to, how will never belong to her,
right?
Because she's doing all this stuff inside the background. Well,
it's the other way around. You will never own me, basically.
You will never own me. Yes, it is something which she is now intangible. She is this very hyper-sexualized person that is basically out to get what she feels that she needs. And finding someone more sexually capable inside of her life and being able to trust him with that is important enough to her to keep going. So I think that this entire narrative with Pete is just him using the last available young individual with all sorts of highlights in his life and then making a story around it so that he can make more sense of what's happened to his reality. I think it's especially important that Pete doesn't really have much lines for himself or much real drive other than making sure he gets to work one day. Other than that, it's all part of this other narrative. And he also makes mention that he just doesn't have that much memory. There's not much really going into, like, his own personal interest, taste, or past or anything like that, because there's nothing to get from there. There's nothing that would aid the narrative for Fred in this
Which
instance.
makes characters like Sheila feel very strange. Like, what's Sheila's
Sheila
role in
was
all
there
this?
because she was also standing in front. That's where, like, the
Oh,
dead
that's
mother.
fair.
Yeah,
so he
she
just
was shouting.
he had to invent her for that reason.
That woman had to be, like, a girlfriend or something. Like, had to be together with him.
Okay.
Like, she said Pete, so that's clearly, like, a woman that's, like, not a sister or anything like that. Or anything like that. It might say brother or something like that. Now, this is where it's getting a little complicated.
Yeah, it could be a sister still.
It could be a sister, but for the use of sex and how important sex is, that's a girlfriend.
You know, I think a lot of what you're saying tracks with me. I could imagine a lot of it. I don't feel like I have a clear singular interpretation at this point that I've cemented myself with. I do agree with a lot of what you're saying, though. I suppose the biggest divergent point for me is that I view the drive at the end as being him being electrocuted in the electric chair. So I imagine, like, the moment he sits down in the car, he's sitting down in the chair, the violent shaking at the end, the sort of kind of frightening imagery is more of the thrashing of a death thrash. But where I also differ too then is that I feel like Dick Laurent and Mr. Eddie are a fictitious element too. So my brain is not thinking that in real life he actually killed that guy. I'm thinking more that when he heard that message on the intercom, Dick Laurent is dead, that is leaking in, and he's creating this new character to be Dick Laurent that he has to be the one to kill.
I think that in both respects, more so leaning on the first one than the second one, is that layered sort of like area of, one, being a drive, but also being his electric chair, his memory merging in with his final moments. I don't think he's fully in his conscious mind as he is getting electrocuted, mind you. I do think that this is based off of a realm of reality, but that reality is then being molded through this dreamscape. I think that, again, both can exist at the same time and also separately. I think that you bring up a good point with Eddie, because the question of, like, Eddie actually existing, his final words could be a note towards, like, being more self-reflection, but at the end of the day, this is someone to conquer. This is something to put out the frustrations on, because this is an antagonist in one's life on the problems that he's having right now.
Yeah.
And it seems like that antagonism is leaning more into Eddie, the person who is interrupting or fulfilling these points inside of life, instead of, like, towards Alice. Because Alice, like, she does die. Like, Renee does die physically. But that's more tragic for the character, because he still loved her. It's just that something snapped within, and that's where this is the bad, how could this ever happen? But Renee still somehow lives on. And this is the, I killed off this one person because this was important to me.
I think one of the biggest pieces of evidence that I could possibly give, as subjective as it is to this idea, is that character of Andy, because if we do take the first 40 minutes of it being real, right, where he goes to that pool party at Andy's place and he sees how his wife interacts with Andy and he's kind of suspicious. It's like, how do you know that guy again?
And guess what he turns Andy into?
That's what I mean. he morphs the idea of the suspicious tapes even back into that, if you want to think it that way. But he turned Andy into the worst fear he could have. That job that he had given her, that the way she knows him, there's some sort of sexual sordid dealing behind that, and that's somehow linked to something really bad with her. So if we do take it to be an element of his mind kind of trying to piece things together in his half delusional, half drugged up state on the electric chair, or going to the electric chair on death row, I think that the stuff with Andy makes a lot of sense as part of a personal narrative. You would turn that guy into this weird like, he has to kill him to get some justice out of it, but to turn him into this sick, gross person, which also gives context for a lot of the really darker elements of the film, that this is his psyche trying to play out the scenarios that make him simultaneously the hero and the villain, I guess.
It also makes it very more fitting, I find, to have the very comical death be with this guy who literally, like, nearly gets decapitated on a table.
It's hard for me to believe that this ending isn't one of the endings that Lynch may have intended, because it fits very well. Even as we say this, though, it is a messy fit. It is, because, like, even getting down to whether the drive happened or not, we don't have a clear linking of how he got to Pete. What even happened after that? I mean, I think your theory works. The idea that he almost ran into Pete, that's when he got apprehended. The thought lingered in his mind. I could see that, but we don't know for sure.
We don't,
and that's where we don't have, like, an anchoring point that I can think of to be able to define, like, where these connections fully lie.
I think the biggest one, but also is something that can just be blended with, like, the David Lynch style. is a moment such as the electric chair.
Yeah.
Like where there's actively like something very heavily, what seems to be supernatural going on, but why is it going on? The convulsing.
It's just such an obvious thing to reference that it lingers in my mind. Even if we don't see the electric chair, that line just seems ominous considering electricity with this guy. Like, it's just hard for me not to think of that. And it is funny because, Lynch is known for dreamlike stories. But Lost Highway might be one of the most clearly dreamlike in that there is a very valid way to read this as almost all being a dream. But I don't think that cheapens it.
No, I don't think so.
I
either.
know that, like, in terms of tropes...
I actually made a funny joke, like, at the beginning of, like, when you were passing by when I first started. It's like, oh, yeah, this classic little film that's like a Mario 2 scenario. It's all a dream. But it may very well be. Yeah,
I think it's a very valid way to read it, and I don't think it cheapens it. If anything, I kind of like the dream interpretation more than if it is all, real. Quote, unquote. Because if it turns out that Andy is just this guy who makes these pornos for Dick Laurent, and that's the way they're connected, and that this whole entire time, Renee lived a double life where she was pretending to be something she wasn't, and all this sort of, like, if that turns out to be more grounded in reality, it's just kind of whatever to me. Like, I don't really have as much of a strong emotional connection. But if I read this as this person's, like, brain trying to connect pieces from the first 40 minutes and scramble them
to get to the point of I like to remember things my own way.
Yeah, it just fits. So I find that more personally satisfying than if it is meant to be all like literal, so to speak. But there's also enough happening that makes it seem like literal doesn't make sense either. So anyway, back to the movie. Back to the podcast. That was good though. I'm glad we had that conversation. Kind of going back forward then. As Alice, she tells Pete that she's positive Mr. Eddie is going to kill them. And they need money. They need to go away and live their life together. And she knows a guy that it's pretty easy to rob. Okay? It's this guy who pays girls to party with him. What?
Speaking of porno man.
Andy, right? And, he's over here like, wait, you partied with him. Did you like it? Like, and she's like, no, it was part of the deal. He works for Mr. Eddie. He makes pornos for him.
Yep. A lot of the story is actually almost like very close to being word for word verbatim of Renee's story earlier to Fred's.
Yes. And then we get this kind of this flashback, I guess you would say, whether, real or fictitious, where she recalls this day when Mr. Eddie had made an appointment for her to see a man, turned out to be Andy, and went to this place, and she was made to wait forever with this guy guarding the door. And then, when it got dark, she was put into another room. And this is when Marilyn Manson's version of I Put a Spell on You starts playing. There's red carpet, red curtains. Mr. Eddie's by the fireplace. A man points a gun at Alice's head, and she is forced to strip. First to her underwear, then go topless. Her fingernails are in this scene red, by the way. And there's just kind of this lingering moment where she is forced to be vulnerable and possibly perform sexually under threat of violence. And so, again, this is where, if it is part of this sort of dream aspect or mind aspect, this is the darkness of Dick Laurent, how cruel he is, how mean he is. But then it's also, again, that sexual perversion that seems to be knacking in at the subconscious of Fred.
Knock, knock. Who's there? Not you.
And,
I also love that they're trying to, like, push a masculine atmosphere. So, like, there's just a guy working out in the corner.
Yes. And she asks Pete if he wants her to go away after kind of explaining that story. He's like, nope, still love you. And they decide to, pursue this idea of stealing from Andy, and that'll be their ticket out of here. Meanwhile, Sheila still has her doubts and suspicions about Pete sleeping with someone else, and she confronts him finally.
Yes.
And he apologizes. She seems angry and totally justified. Like, Sheila had done nothing wrong from what I can tell in this narrative. And the mom, Pete's mom, says that a man is called several times. It turns out to be Mr. Eddie. Mr. Eddie hands the phone over to a friend of his. Which,
if we are to take the element of doubts in, like, at first it's like Eddie's like, hey, buddy. Hey, how you doing? How you doing, friend? You're doing good. I'm glad to hear. hey there, Pete. I think that I got a friend right here that he wants to have a word with you. You know. And if we are to go to this friend, if you will, of Dick Laurent, and just having him speak through, I think that's Pete having his doubts, if you will.
Yeah.
And that being a power play for someone like Mr. Eddie, because he's freaking Mr. Eddie.
Or he just has to deal with Satan.
Or if he just deals with Satan directly.
Either way.
I like working with Tao more than I like working with Satan, but that's just my Saturday and Sundays, you know?
Guess it depends on which one offers better benefit plan. And then they get a little anecdote, a little story here. I quite like this isolated moment where the mystery man says, in the East, in the Far East, when a person is sentenced to death, they're sent to a place where they can't escape, never knowing when an executioner may step up behind them and fire a bullet into the back of their head. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Again, if we were to read this as moments before death row, he's escaped, he's been set free, but more so with the drugs that he has inside of his mouth and his brain. He is now free to roam.
No, I mean, just that's
before,
what I mean is
any
that
moment he could be executed.
Yeah, if we just take it literally here, if we don't take the dream approach, it's just the idea
just
that
this weird man.
No, it's the idea that Mr. Eddie at any moment can kill you.
Yes.
You think you're so smart, you think you know what you're doing, you think you're in control.
Fair.
We're watching you. You never know when it's going to hit you. However, if we are taking the dream approach, this is David Lynch poking you in the eye, saying, do you get it? I am referring to the idea here that at some point an executioner may kill you. You do not know when it's going to happen. Have you considered this thought that is happening to you right now, Fred? And it's so on the nose, in this case on the eye, that it feels right. You know?
It does.
It does. It really does. Also, again, Mr. A takes back the phone. Just wanted to jump on and tell you I'm really glad you're doing okay. Hang up.
Great.
It was a really good power play.
It was.
Really good power play. By the way, Andy's place is located on 2224 Deep Dell Place. You add those numbers together, that's 10. 10 is the number of completion.
Completion of what?
It's the number of completion.
Completion of what?
It is the number of completion. It's
what are we completing here?
The dream. Not quite. Actually, there's still stuff
There's
after
still
it.
more to go!
But it's complete. It's some video games you can get 100%, and some games you get 110%. 100% is the going to the house, the Deep Dell Place. 110. Also, Del Mibbler clearly is the owner of this place in the Twin Peaks universe. So Alice is going to be with Andy upstairs, and Pete is going to wait downstairs until Alice sends Andy down. So noticing that, again, that Alice is going to use her, sexual wiles to entertain Andy and distract him. That's her weaponized sexuality, again, in view here. Speaking of in-view sexuality, when Andy enters through past the blue light of the pool we saw earlier, he sees this gigantic, screen where Alice is there during a sex scene. And it is just washed in blue.
Yep.
And he kind of is just reacting to that. Then all of a sudden, Andy comes down the stairs. He bops Andy on the head with the statue with the intent to knock him out. And Alice,
which, by the way, I from what I'm seeing, as far as this actor is, if you will,
we didn't even talk about the actor, did we? Hardly.
We did not really talk about the actor.
I made a fan fiction about him with Wendy's. Anyway, continue.
Regardless, he strikes towards this character, and might I say, with the open robe sort of visage, if you will. It doesn't look like it's trying to emphasize anything being well endowed.
Again, for Andy, you mean?
For Andy, yes.
Oh, okay.
But both cases,
we haven't really talked about the actor. I'll be honest, I didn't really find the performance of Balthazar Getty as Pete to be anything that notable. I thought it was fine. I don't think it was bad. It was fine.
I think he did good. I think that I don't have any negative feelings on
I got more out of Pullman's performance of Fred than I did.
I agree.
This one. A little more layered.
Yeah.
But also, this character spends most of the movie just kind of vaguely confused about what he is.
Regardless, what I want to try to get that at, though,
Yeah.
is that I tried to look for Andy's penis, but I could not really see it.
You really tried to, and that's a commentary in of itself, isn't
it? I think it's important because, for one, we have so many sort of points in which the female form is emphasized, if you will, and then we have this guy with an open robe and just bearing forward, bumbling forward almost, if you will, not intentionally, but more so. I'm going to my kitchen at 2 a.m. sort of way.
Right.
And yeah, like there's no angle sort of like present on that or anything like that.
It is interesting.
It just seems like, for example, hey, he's just not all he's cracked up to be, if you will. Like again, like making narratives.
You
on
could
this
say
guy.
that he doesn't have a corner on the penis market because he got his head slammed, lunged into a corner of a table.
He got circumcised on his head, but the wrong head.
Yeah, haha. Circumcised, I mean, we got a wedge.
Yep.
Got a wedge in his noggin. Yeah, Alice is like smooching on him for doing the successful bop on the head before Andy does the lunge and gets vaulted to the table. And then Alice like no-sells her line reaction. Wow. Like just no emotion. Like, wow.
It's just like, we killed him. It's like,
you killed him. Which again,
and it's like not even like arguing. It's just like, what do we do now?
Yeah, this is kind of one of the first main indications that Alice might be a bit more manipulating the situation, and that she might be in more control than it might at first appear with what's going on. But for a while there, she was more the damsel in distress character of like, you need to get me out of here because Dick Laurent's a dangerous man and we got to go off together because I love you. But now it's just like, oh yeah, you killed that guy. I'm going to go rob the stuff. You better figure this out.
Yes. After things become more tense, this dream is slowly turning into a nightmare, if you will. There's still points in which she is still playful with him, like when he returns to her later on where she's like digging through a few things and she has a gun inside of her hands. She instead just playfully goes like, what, do you think I'll shoot you? This is for you.
And then sticks the gun
Put it
down
in your
his pants, which phallic imagery, blah, blah, blah. I'm giving you the tool of destruction at your groin. There's a lot of like overlapping here of sexuality and violence. The idea of VHS tapes both having footage of like snuff film murder as well as pornography. There is that element going on here. And I think it's handled well. I think it's really easy to make that comparison like without tact. But I think there's things going on here that work on a subconscious level to make that work.
I agree.
Both are violent outbursts, one could say, in this film.
Very much so.
He goes to one of the rooms, by the way, and there's like this white flashing happening. He goes to room 26, which inside it's like all red, and there's a sex scene happening there. And I don't know if the woman is meant to be Patricia Arquette or someone else. It's not really that clear in the lighting, especially. But this voice, did you want to talk to me? Did you want to ask me why? Like extends the why, and then he just like leaves. And the whole time it's like this the Rammstein music playing in the background.
It's something, yes, and it's something horrifying enough to quickly close the door. I lean into the fact that instead of like talking or asking those whys, we just invite doubt in and just let it linger.
Yeah.
Become more powerful.
And it's almost, again, that blurring of the lines where what she's saying more matches up with maybe how he's feeling about Alice, but this is not the location Alice was in. It doesn't make any sense.
Yes.
She would not be upstairs right now, which furthers the dream logic idea. And it's around the time that Pete's nose is also bleeding too. Which, do we know why the nose was bleeding? I just noted it in there that it started bleeding, but did something cause it?
I don't think that there was something that physically actively caused it. He, like Pete himself, in the moment has not really experienced anything like twinging pain. I think that if anything, it's just more thematic for injuries, if you will, similar to how like the head injury matches up with another head injury at another time.
Fair enough. We also do get here this photograph that's over at Andy's place.
Oh, ma.
What?
Ma.
Could you please speak up?
Ma.
Oh, you're doing a song reference. You're looking at this photograph. Right? I think. Nickelback?
Yes, it is Nickelback.
That's what that was? Okay.
It was.
Fair enough. This photograph that is of presumably both Alice and Renee, like next to each other, with on one end Dick Laurent and on one end Andy. So this photo seems important because we do get image then of Alice and Renee together as two separate people. Then later, we're going to see the same image, but instead of Alice and Renee, it is just one composite woman of Renee. Alice is no longer in the photo. The photo is changed so that they are smushed together as one person.
Yep.
And the photo then, Dick Laurent and Andy are closer together. It's like a different photo altogether. So interpreting this idea that it always has been Renee, that Alice was never really there, that sort of mentality.
And I think that it's important that we have these sort of like separations as well as togetherness, because it's almost as if Alice's whole entire existence seems to be in favor of a fantasy ideal, and in many cases, until the very end, seems to be somewhat, at her own behest, more positive, because she's been just drug into this overall business herself. She's trying to find ways out, if you will. And there's a scene later on with the vampire that goes on to say that that's Renee. If she's told you that she's Alice, she's lying. And with that sort of like in mind, if again we take this entity as the devil or the means of doubt, it's almost as if saying to, if you keep trying to dilute this with a fantasy, it's not, you're going to get so unfocused and it's going to get muddled. No, this is Renee. Focus on that before we go on a fun Renee arc and the few scenes to follow.
So yeah, Pete and Alice are driving until they reach this random wooden place that we saw earlier in Fred's vision in the prison cell. I'm going to call it a vision. I don't know, delusion, whatever you want to call it.
Regardless,
Same place.
An implosion in the creation of a cabin.
And Alice is clearly in charge now. She's the one that's guiding Pete. And Pete is like, well, why did you choose me?
Oh, I was just going to bring up, this is the place of her fence, if you will. She calls it her fence, like the location of her fence.
What do you mean?
Oh, a fence is someone that you give stolen goods to.
Oh, I missed that part of the movie.
Yeah, no, that's why that they went to that general location, if you will, because she's got a fence that will be able to get them a bunch of money.
Sure.
But the thing is that, well, it doesn't seem like money's here. No. It just seems like a vampire. It lives here.
Yeah, Pete asks why she chose him, and she just kind of dodges the question, asks if he still wants her. They then start having sex on the ground.
Yep.
As my note says, the gravelly ground.
The gravelly ground.
At night, all caps, gotta be cold.
Gotta be cold.
It's just like in
the
headlights.
But they're so hot.
It's like, could you imagine the discomfort? Because they're like, their bare backs are grinding against the rocks here.
I predominantly put myself as an asexual, so I don't know.
Just go sometime
against
at night.
Rocks already sounds not so fun to me. But I mean, imagine that the chemicals in one's mind, in which like gets you going and in the mood. Maybe they're just into that pain.
You know, like, carpet burn, rug burn is one thing, right?
Tiny rock burn.
Tiny rock burn sounds worse. I don't recommend people go out into the highway at night in the darkness and rub their back against the gravel for prolonged periods of time, with the weight of another person pushing against them too, further into the tiny rocks.
But it's still hot, steamy sex.
After which, you know, he's like, I want you. And she whispers in his ear, you'll never have me. And then she gets up. Okay, I'm butchering it, but this is one of my favorite moments of the movie. I do think the "you'll never have me" line is like...
It's a pretty solid one, whether or not it is on top of Pete or Batman. As she walks away in the nude towards the overall steps of the cabin and steps in, and we slowly turn Pete into...
Not even really slowly. He's just on the ground, then he gets up and he's suddenly Bill Pullman.
Boop.
He's suddenly Fred Madison again, very abruptly.
Yep.
And he doesn't seem to really have, like, changed his... Like, it's not like Fred stands up and he looks around like, where am I? You know, it's like Fred knows what's going on enough to continue acting like Pete was, you know?
And he steps forward into the cabin to have that dialogue with the vampire, if you will. And the way that the tone of this dialogue sounds, if you will, revealing about this difference, and slowly, like, bring out the overall video camera, I enjoy that there's almost this... like taking the sense of doubt and just like making a very horrifying man out of him, taking like the worst thing that he can have, like a video camera, because he hates like the idea of those tapes, and him being the one behind them, if you will, and just chasing him down with his video camera.
He doesn't want to be seen for what he is. And he doesn't want to see himself for what he is as well.
Yep. It is.
Because
it's an interesting use of an overall personal demon.
And when you're faced completely with your actions and what you've done, when you can't look away and mask it over with some sort of fantasy, that sort of unflinching pain would be his worst fear. Because he doesn't want to admit that he killed his wife. It all tracks.
It does.
It all tracks. Over at the Lost Highway Hotel.
The Lost Highway Hotel, you say, after running away from the vampire.
Room 26? Huh. 26. Does that number sound familiar? 26. It's almost like that
No,
was
I don't know.
that was the sex room earlier. We're both furiously just like scratching our goatees right now. A black-haired, from what I could tell, Patricia Arquette has sex with Mr. Eddie / Dick Laurent in this location.
Yep. As the sex, kisses him on the forehead, and
No
walks
longer
away.
blonde. No longer blonde.
No longer blonde.
Fred-
That's because it's Renee. Alice is not
it
real.
was never Alice. If she tells you otherwise, she was lying. Fred knocks on Dick Laurent's door, beats him for putting him in the trunk. Mystery Man just kind of taking a peek outside the nearby window.
Which, by the way, it's a strange little scene in which, like, you see, like, of course, I'm just, like, spectating off to the side. What I thoroughly enjoy is almost, like, as a sense of validation for himself. As soon as he, like, knocks on the door, he says, Renee? Almost solidifying
Yeah.
everything. He grabs him, takes him, puts him in the trunk, and what happens after they drive off to an unknown location and he opens the trunk? What happens there?
A Jack in the Box, a Dick Laurent in the trunk.
I love the fact that, like, Mr. Eddie just, like, leaps out of the
This
car
is a man
and
who would just, he
chokes
goes
him
down fighting. He goes down fighting. And
There's support.
Fred slashes his throat with a knife.
The knife handed to him by the vampire. Because apparently this is just where he gets all his weapons from.
That's how he gets his blood to drink as his vampire.
Slits him in the throat, and he's able to still speak.
But audibly choking on
Audibly
his own
choking. Not like gurgly choking.
No.
Just like, I got to cough a little bit. Does anyone have a napkin choking?
blood. And I also like how Dick Laurent, asks, what do you guys want? And he tries to almost argue like, hey, we can work together. We can kind of collaborate here. But the mystery man instead shows him the blue porno, which turns into a slasher at points. And it shows what presumably is a flashback of Dick Laurent viewing that with the black hair Patricia Arquette.
Yes.
What do you make of what's being shown to Dick Laurent here?
The very worst case scenario of all, if you will. It's something in which someone as powerful as Dick Laurent, whether in a personal fiction or in a potential reality, is shown that, like, the worst cases of what he is as a person is presented before him before he is utterly consumed and killed off by the overall being of doubt himself. The one who is the being of doubt is the one who does the finishing blow and shoots him in the chest after presenting him with it. Almost as if, like, at that little cryptic, maybe it is the devil scenario, if you will, like showing you your sins.
Also,
right for you.
Curiously, the mystery man whispers something in Fred's ear. I don't think we ever find out what that was.
What's in the box?
I like to believe it's the same thing that, Laura Palmer was whispering in, Dale Cooper's ear in that dream, Something about Leland or something. No, I'll tell you about in the morning after I sleep on it. Don't worry, Sheriff Truman. It can wait. It can never wait. We go back to Andy's place briefly. Well, we as the viewers, not Fred. And it's an active crime scene at this point, and that's where the photo on the counter has shifted. When they see this photo, they remark that that is the wife of Fred Madison. They don't say the name Renee, but by association, they're identifying that as Renee. And at which point, they also talk about how Pete Dayton's prints are all over the place.
Yes.
And the one detective is like, you know what? You know what I think? There's no such thing as a bad coincidence. What do you make of that line?
What I make of that line? I think it's that sort of like thin... If we believe it inside of the narrative, if you will, of the mental narrative, it's a reinforcement of an idea of, like, taking in coincidences as an area of potential correlation. It's almost like saying, like, yeah, you know what? I think that this all just sort of, like, links together and it just makes sense. In a broader sense, if you will, if we believe in the very confusing timeline of this film being like, you know what, we were following them around all week. This was just bound to happen.
Yeah. I'm not 100% sure how I understand this quote as well. I'm kind of grappling with it and kind of struggling with it. But this does do a lot to suggest the idea that the mystery man had suggested that it always has been only Renee.
Yes.
Which really peels apart the fabric of Pete's narrative the moment you do that. So, yeah. We also see Fred returning to his old home and going into there and saying Dick Laurent is dead, therefore kind of closing the loop almost of now coming back to the start of it and saying the line that began the film, and thus the inciting accident. The question of how that even came to be was finally given an answer just in the most roundabout, weird way possible, that he himself had caused that message to be. And that's where we get the chasing into the night, the advancing along the lost highway. And as I put it, he violently thrashes as he becomes body horror. He certainly do become body horror. He do become
body horror. That is a very eloquent way of saying it.
So we've talked about some of the men and their roles in the film. Some of the men might be one men. Who knows how many men there are? Men. I would say the most complex character, maybe you could say it's Fred because everything might be in his mind, but I think otherwise, in terms of like the characters we see on the film for the most part, I think that Patricia Arquette's dual roles of Renee Madison and Alice Wakefield are among the more complex.
Oh, okay. Fair. That you say that about Laura Palmer and Maddie Ferguson. I mean,
in
Renee
the credits,
Madison, Alice Wakefield.
In the credits, they are organized for this film by order of appearance, and it is organized that way with Renee as a separate character from Alice.
Yes.
Whereas a lot of other times where there's the duality, like Mr. Eddie / Dick Laurent is identified as one character.
Well, that's like two different names.
That's just two different names.
Yeah.
But they do consider Renee and Alice two different characters.
Yes.
Notable for this. Patricia Arquette took the roles of Renee and Alice, supposedly, because she wanted to portray a more sexually desirable and dangerous woman, a role that she said she had never done before that. And she also was a big fan of David Lynch's prior work. On a June 18th, 2019 episode...
I want to wait for, like, the actor that says, I hated David Lynch, and I'm surprised that I actually got on set to work with him.
On June 18th, 2019, on an episode of PBS, the series Actors on Actors, Patricia Arquette recalled doing one of her nude scenes in this film. She admitted she chose to play characters more sexually confident in herself, including performing nude and sex scenes. Arquette added, quote, I'm completely opposite in my personal life. I was born really modest. I don't want anyone to see me naked. When it came to time to film the film, she made sure only the necessary crew members were on the set. She said, maybe this is inappropriate. Maybe I can get sued for this, but I told everyone I'm going to take off my robe. If I turn around and see you and I know you don't need to be on the set, I'm going to come punch you in the face. And she said all of a sudden about 40 people were scattering into the desert. It does remind you of how big these film sets are, that like 40 people could just like be disposable and it could still be shot.
Disposable in the desert.
It could still be shot. Like they didn't need to be there for that scene. There's just so many people just there. So, not huge, I don't think, for the film, but it was an interesting little side there. What do you think of Patricia Arquette playing these two characters?
I think that overall that she's very well accomplished through her performances throughout the roles. I think that the sort of like difficulty to read individual towards the beginning, if not a more sympathetic role at the beginning, is very notable. I think that her appearance throughout the film has her completing the goal of what the actress set out to do. Like, she set out to be this more overall sexual individual, and I think that she accomplished that with strides and so on. But beyond that, I don't really know what to say beyond I was very impressed.
I thought she was fine.
I was okay.
I guess I wasn't really that impressed. I thought she did an okay job.
Yeah, I think I was impressed. I think she did better. I win.
What would you say like was the thing that she did really well that won you over?
The thing that probably won me over was the second viewing. It was the second viewing when I ended up kind of like seeing her in this blue light scenario, if you will, of just like her wandering around or just looking about or just like trying to deal with this man inside of her life that is dangerous. Like very clearly he's becoming more and more of a danger, and how like she's just trying to stay reserved enough, calm enough, if you will. But the thing is that the problem just doesn't go away, and it doesn't feel like still. It doesn't feel anything in which I think that she could have done any better in certain areas. I think that for what she was given, she excelled with.
Do you think she did a better job with Renee or Alice, or equal?
Renee. But
Renee?
mostly because I think I have a bias against characters like Alice.
Okay. How so?
A character that appears to be a bit of temptation inside of it. Yeah.
The femme fatale.
The femme fatale, yes.
Fair enough. Fair enough. You know, maybe it's doing it to subvert the idea. Maybe. But it's still playing into that trope to do that.
Yep.
So with Renee, she's got two primary connections we can determine. One is with Fred, and then one is with Andy. So Andy's a pretty quick one. We could probably wrap that up. Is that all we get in the first 40 minutes is that she met Andy a long time ago at some place called Moke's. She said they became friends. He told her about a job. She doesn't remember what the job was. And then she's like, yeah, Andy's okay, though. And then Fred just has the conclusion that he has some effed up friends. And that's pretty much all we know for a fact.
Yeah.
The guy throws pool parties, and Fred's suspicious of him, but she just says he's a fine guy. He gave him some kind of job at some point. She doesn't remember what the job was.
Yeah.
And that's it.
It just seems like a friend called her up at one point, invited them to a party, and so on.
If it turns out that the incidents that are unfolding in Pete's part are based on some element of reality, it is possible that Renee is lying here, that she has a double life, that this guy, Andy, the job he had was actually very sinister and very, very dirty and gross and exploitative and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But we don't have enough to confirm at that moment in the first 40 minutes that that's any of it. This just, again, this is where I think your dream analysis fits, is that it feels like this plays into what Fred is thinking.
Yes.
Which is a pretty extreme thought, given just the circumstances of wife knows a friend from somewhere. It must be the porno man.
It must be
is
the
a very,
pornos!
very drastic jump.
It is.
So back to Fred then. Renee's relationship with Fred. Like I said, first viewing, I kind of filtered it through the idea that he seems to be domineering, controlling, to the extent that it might even be hinting at possible abuse or violence in the household, because she shirks away. She gasps when he's suddenly behind her. She doesn't make eye contact. There's a lot of signs of lack of connection. But again, counterpoint of that, if there is some truth to the assessment of the later parts of the film, she may be not making eye contact because she is in control of the situation. She's not going to give him the gratification of that eye contact. She knows that she's just going to go wherever she wants anyway. She'll lie that she's reading, but she's really out of the house doing whatever she wants. And when he comes home, he's never really going to please her, but she'll just get over with, and then she'll move on with her life. You could read her as maybe a little bit more agency than what I'm thinking at the beginning. What do you kind of view with Renee and Fred? Where do you think this relationship sits?
Horrible. Like, it seems like incredibly unstable, and it seems that Fred is so focused on the fact that he can't really do the sex correctly, that he's almost like centered, like, the focus of the relationship around that. Like, what other aspects of their relationship that they have, what sort of like interest they have, is maybe laughter. But beyond that, I don't know.
Well, and it's the idea that she doesn't even go to the thing he's really excelling at, which is the saxophone.
Yep, she's not there, like, with them at the time, which, hey, it's a late-night club.
She's not obligated to go either. It sounds like they go all the time.
It sounds like at this point, like, it's... The lack of connection with them seems like this is a failing marriage at the moment.
How the extent to which it's failing, the extent to which there's darker things on the periphery, that's up to the imagination and kind of your own determination.
Yep.
Your headcanon as far as things are concerned. Alice Wakefield also kind of has two primary, I guess, male interactions. Andy is still in the element here, I suppose, but I'm mainly thinking of Mr. Eddie and Pete as the two focals. So with Mr. Eddie, how do you interpret their connection?
Well, their connection is, again, if we go on to the means of dream, if you will, Eddie's literal name, if you will, is Dick.
Yes.
Like Dick. It's Dick. It's penis.
Honestly, I never thought of that.
Okay. I'm thinking when it comes to, like, porno places and that the big bad guy is named Dick to emphasize, like, the bad thing. I think that he is meant to be someone powerful who has a hold on this one individual. In some realms, making Alice more sympathetic. But on another end of the realm, he is someone that is the worst of the worst.
Okay.
And so to have, like, the worst of the worst sort of guy having a hold on someone that Pete and by extension Fred hold a great admiration for It's just making big villains, if anything.
So, like, do you interpret Renee as, like, almost a captive prisoner of, like, Fred, that she can't leave him or else she'll be in danger, that she needs rescuing? Or do you think, like, this was totally, like, kind of willing in the sense that she was getting herself in danger, but she was also putting herself in a position of power, and she knew at any moment she could betray him?
I think it's actually fades from one to two. Like, it fades from one side to the other, because at the beginning, that's when we see, like, her getting involved in the business, if you will, and where she's more so very light of voice, if you will, during Pete's interactions. But by the end, when they're just sort of laughing at the horror snuff film pornos together with everyone who is horrible in the same room, including the individual we have off to the side who's made pornos, I think that this is just like a process, if you will, a process of how involved in this dark area that she is until, like, the truth of it being Renee is revealed. So by his perspective, she becomes the worst as, like, things... He delves deeper into his delusions.
This is, again, one of those angles where I think the dream analysis part of it is a bit more appealing to me, because then it shows that she shifts in his perspective, kind of falling back on, I mentioned this before in Twin Peaks Pod, the angel-witch sort of dichotomy here, right? The Madonna whore complex, that she's either the damsel in distress who needs rescuing, or she is the manipulative femme fatale who is actually, behind the whole thing.
Yep.
Not anywhere in between. She can't have sexual agency and still be a good person. Nope. She's either, like, being over-dominated by this horrible man, or she is manipulating him because she's cold-hearted Black Widow mode. And if we take it to be this is Fred's psyche here, it reveals his sort of sexist views on women and Renee specifically.
Yes.
You're either that or you're that. If this is meant to be interpreted literally, then it's like, David Lynch, you've made a sexist character along with your writer buddy here. You know what I mean? Like, it's... The moment it's all Fred's psyche, all the darker elements of it kind of fall into place in a way that I can understand a bit better and contextualize. So, yeah, I think that that's fair, that if it is all in the mind, she is shifting. Her character is mutable. You know, it is changing as it happens. And in that way, with Pete, she at some points is... more sincere in her love, perhaps. But even when at the beginning, when I think about her interactions, she's very straightforward. We're like, yeah, how'd you feel if you asked me out on a date? Probably shouldn't do that. Okay, well, I'm going to ask you out on a date. Okay, fine, I'm going to go call. Like, she's very in control even from the beginning.
Yes.
So, I don't know. I think her character is very elusive. And again, that line of, you'll never really have me, he still by the end doesn't understand her. And her mind works. And if we take that to be the mind of a murderer, he can do violence upon her, he can silence her, he can kill her. He will never know her. He will never have that real power of understanding her, because it's escapable to him. He just can't grasp it. And even now she's evading him. I think that's more compelling than if it's not a dream.
I agree.
So, in conclusion, we agree. Nice. I love it. Perfect.
We won but no, this is not Twin Peaks. We win Lost Highway.
We win the Lost Highway. Our reward is Scarmambosia, pain and suffering.
Our reward for winning a Lost Highway is the 3-piece movie set to Cars, the movie. After all, life is a highway.
You have a laugh track on that soundboard? I'm Johnny Cash. That's not a laugh board, Professor.
I'm laughing.
That's not a laugh board. That's a deep cut. That's an oldie right there. So Mr. Eddie / Dick Laurent is played by Roger. No, I said Roger. It's Robert. Robert Loggia. Apparently, I had mispronounced his name as Logia at some point or something when I was talking about Blue Velvet. I'm still not sure I'm saying it right. My apologies if I'm saying it wrong. Robert Loggia was the first and only choice to play the character of Mr. Eddie. Because previously, he had the former desire to play Frank Booth in Blue Velvet. Remember when I was listing all those people that were like the first choice, supposedly, to play Frank Booth?
Yep.
This was one of those people.
Welcome in, and I gotta say, he certainly has atmosphere, if not adjacent to that of a Frank Booth.
So yeah, if you remind you of Frank Booth, that might be very much on purpose here. In 1985, Loggia showed up for an audition on the set of Blue Velvet, unaware that Dennis Hopper had already been cast, and he proceeded to wait for 3 hours, growing increasingly agitated. Upon seeing Lynch and learning of Hopper's casting, Loggia proceeded to give an extremely profane and angry rant to Lynch for making him wait, only to remind him that the role had already been cast, which remained in Lynch's head for nearly 10 years, as what would eventually become Mr. Eddie's road rage scene. This is, again, a little bit of editorializing where I don't know if that source can confirm that. Can you confirm that's where the road rage scene came from? I don't know, because Michael J. Anderson also thought that's where that one encounter that David Lynch had prior, where Michael J. Anderson was in the car. David Lynch said that he wanted to destroy the person and just cut them off. I don't know where the road rage scene came from. This is one interpretation.
Okay.
Anyway, 10 years later or about there, Loggia received a phone call from Lynch requesting his performance in the movie, and Loggia was more than happy to accept. Apparently, Robert Loggia kept forgetting his choreographed moves in his big fight scene with Bill Pullman, resulting in Pullman repeatedly and accidentally hitting him, like actually hitting him. So, because he just didn't know what he was supposed to do.
Oh, no.
So,
did they have no choreographer for this?
I think they did. I just think it said that he kept forgetting the moves.
Okay.
I don't know, man. I just go with what the internet tells me.
That's scary.
Yeah. Just says Mr. Eddie's a scary man.
No, I think that's up to like the director or the people there on the set that day.
Fair enough.
I think that's the scary thing.
Fair enough. So we kind of glossed over it earlier, but Mr. Eddie had a great drive scene with Pete.
Yeah.
Going way back over here to the car dealership. He picks him up and he hugs him, asks what happened. If someone's giving you trouble, just say the word. I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it like that. Like that. And he just tells everyone working there, Pete's taking a ride with me. He's going with me. And he says he doesn't like the sound of something. Well, most literal way, he doesn't like the sound of his engine. It's making a weird noise. He has Pete check the engine. But also the vague language, I don't like the sound of something. I'm suspicious of something, which has connotations for this character.
Yes.
Anyway, he goes and fixes the engine. Mr. Eddie's all smiles. It's beautiful. Did a great job, Pete. But then someone behind them is like swerving, driving real fast right against their bumper, and is right on their tail, honking. Mr. Eddie, finally pulls, he rolls down the window, gives him a sign to pass, and the man, as he's passing, flips him off. Big mistake. Two guys in the back immediately buckle their seatbelts because they know where this is headed. Mr. Eddie rockets off, just like the footage is sped forward, almost it's almost comical, right?
Yes. No, it is comical.
Which I think is on purpose, for sure. And he rockets off and rams again. So taking your vulgar statement earlier, Dick rams himself into the back end.
Yep.
Violently. Anyway, so then they drive him nearly off the road. Eddie grabs his gun. The guys in the back are at the ready, and they're just screaming. Mr. Eddie's just screaming at him you never tailgate. Right? Tells him to get a driver's manual and study it and follow the rules. 50,000 people were killed on the highway last year because of a-holes like you.
The more you know.
So again, kind of that blurring of the lines between violence and comedy that Lynch is probably one of the best at. I don't know of anyone who's better at that thing of violence with comedy like this. Mm-hmm. You don't know how to feel. Are you supposed to be afraid and intimidated? Are you supposed to laugh at the guy? That's a very unique feeling sometimes. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of something very, very, very similar encounter, one would say. I was in high school, and I was with a group of friends, I think it was 3 or 4 friends, and we were outside quite kind of near where the principal's office was, but in the main commons area of our school. And we were just talking pretty quietly. It's kind of casual conversation. And the assistant principal comes out of the room and starts chewing us out for shouting right outside his door. And none of us had been shouting. And I was a very socially awkward, socially inept child. I'm slightly better now. But I just kind of was smiling because I thought he was joking. My little pea brain, 10th grade brain was he's doing a bit. Because we were not yelling, and I knew we weren't yelling. And he looked at me, and he saw me smiling, and he chewed me out even more because he thought I was thinking this was funny. And that's that feeling you get, right? When someone's yelling so over the top about something that you know is ridiculous.
Yes.
That you're okay, this is scary. This person's way too angry. This is a frightening situation for me. But also, do you realize what you're yelling about right now? And this is kind of reminding me about the situation where he's screaming about getting a driver's manual and, people die on the highway. And it's like, you just got done pulling a gun on someone. Like, you're talking to me about this.
I see. Clearly mistakes are made. You've got to tie yourself down and just relax yourself.
So anyway, I am definitely saying that they are equally the same situation.
It's the same exact thing.
Me as 10th grader, and this basically the same thing.
You told David Lynch to write this.
My assistant principal was Robert Loggia. This really happened. But yeah, Pete just kind of watches from the car. This is where that Hollywood signage is on the hill in the back, and I'm still kind of struggling to think, is that important? Because with Lynch, he could have filmed this on any particular hill. Why did he want the Hollywood sign in view like that?
Now, is this coincidence or correlation?
I think it's more correlation because, again, you can find any shooting location, and Lynch is so picky. Yeah, he doesn't do things until he has the right place.
Yeah, but maybe there were 90% aspect of this was perfect. It's just that was just mundane.
With Lynch, it's got to be 100. I
will mold this mountain.
I'm going to go blow up the Hollywood signs. Remove the letters from the mountain.
You see where I'm getting at with that.
No, but I'm inclined to believe it's on purpose, and it's subtle enough that the movie never, shoves it in your face that this is LA, Hollywood, but I don't know. It's definitely an element of it. I just don't know how to feel about it yet. Because there's also the element of film being used here as hyper-violence and hypersexualization. But Lynch is not the type to be movies these days are too violent, too sexual. Lynch, you are that. Lynch, you are those things. So, I don't think he's trying to do some criticism of Hollywood. Not that way, at least. Maybe he's doing the criticism if we want to really defend him as the feminist icon right now, and say that Lynch was right. You could say that Lynch is calling out Hollywood for the tropes that this movie is showing off. The idea we talked about with Alice of the damsel in distress dichotomy with the femme fatale, that this is what Hollywood movies are like. This is what that fiction's like, but the truth, it's much different than that. You could do that. Or maybe you're exposing the fact that Hollywood has this sort of dark underbelly of a grossness underneath it. Similar to how Blue Velvet, you had the pristine green lawn underneath of the bugs. Similar here, you have the Hollywood signs, you have the flashing lights, but underneath it all is the sort of people who would do this violence and this underground pornography industry and blah, blah, blah. Maybe. IDK. By the way, I did make a little offhand comment about David Lynch, the feminist here, and I want to be clear, I actually do kind of think this movie, in respect to the movies we've seen so far from David Lynch, I kind of left this one feeling this was one of the best in terms of portrayal of gender and characters. I mean, I noticed there are definitely moments of nudity or sex. A lot of it does not feel sexualized or objectified. If anything, a lot of those scenes have a sort of ominous or dark tone where the women are kind of in danger. And it's more of a sense of these are the machinations of manipulative men who force their will. I feel the sex scene earlier with Fred and Renee, that one I don't think necessarily sexualized Renee. I think if anything, it made it seem like there was the focus on how pathetic and bad the dude is here. Mm-hmm. And then the most explicit nudity would be the scene where she's forced at gunpoint to strip. But again, everything about that scene, I don't think it's sexualizing the actor or trying to in some way titillate the audience. I really don't think that's what's happening in a lot of these scenes. Even when it's showing a rather hardcore pornographic scene, it doesn't feel to me it's done for the audience's reaction.
I suppose that I don't know if I necessarily agree per se. I didn't get as much from them as you're presenting here. Mm-hmm. For the most part, because of the specific shots that we get of individuals such as Renee's actor right before the act of sex, where her robe is slowly dropping off and she's posing, if you will, before walking off and also then returning to the bed scene later, or the bouncing booba at certain points, or the clear prominent shots that do focus upon the breast on multiple moments. Meanwhile, I find many of the male figures to be more obscured.
Yes,
in
at the same time, I think it was the Pete sex scene with Sheila. We have prominent imagery of his back on most of that scene. It's mostly his back muscles that we're looking at more than we actually are her.
I didn't see that balance. I saw the opposite, I suppose.
Okay.
So maybe we should get like a stopwatch to be like, oh, here's the back
We're
amount.
going to quantifiably, objectively measure the sexualization of this film. I guess
I
this is
suppose
all,
that
it's all subjective.
Yes, if there's anything that I could say is that the male form isn't as explored as I would say the female form.
But I guess I don't feel like in this film it's trying to explore things equally. I think it's more showing how people, oftentimes men in power, control the women in their lives, whether it's the wife that they're domineering over, or it's criminals like Loja, or the directors of these pornographic films. I mostly see it as kind of a portrayal of those situations.
Okay.
So I think it'd be kind of awkwardly weird if it tried to show the beauty of the male form in that context.
Yeah.
Because most of this is dark. Most of this is not good. I guess I'm saying is that, Lynch is no stranger to, especially from his eternal foe, Roger Ebert, from criticism about his portrayals of nudity and sexuality with female characters and with the actors who play them. I kind of left this one feeling like this was very well considered. I didn't think really much of it was excessive. It at least for my reading of it, I do think that while I'm not a huge fan of Patricia Arquette's portrayal, I thought it was good, I thought it was fine, but I do think that her character has a lot more, and I should say characters, playing multiple here. There's a lot more going on with her than I felt there was with Lula or with Sandy from Blue Velvet. Women have oftentimes been very minor elements in the lives of their male characters, whereas this gave, by the end, Alice a lot of agency. And it showed that even if Fred is dominating over the marriage, he really will never know her because he never was able to try. He just kind of always tried to push and push and push. So I don't know. Again, I kind of look at this film and it's more like I'm a little bit more thinking this movie's got some good ideas.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. For how dirty and gross a lot of this movie feels in its theming, I don't feel it stoops to that low. I don't feel like it is exploitation.
Okay.
I think it's about exploitation, but isn't exploitative.
Okay.
That's probably what I should have opened with. That's like the thesis statement, right?
It is the thesis statement.
So would you disagree with that then? Do you think it is exploitative?
I think that's something I'm going to percolate on. I think that you bring up some interesting points itself, and I think that the overall line you bring up in your thesis statement has me wanting to process more of that, but I think I need to
that's fair.
Keep processing this film multiple times.
And that's the thing about this movie that I really like is it does lend itself to multiple viewings very, very well.
I agree.
And it's open enough that you're going to get what each time you might get something different.
I think it benefits me personally from the multiple viewings to even just get past the fact that the first half hour I think basically bored me.
I wanted to say you get what you come for, you get what you want out of it, but I'm like, no, not really. I don't think you always get what you want. I think it's going to spit things at you, and it might be tapping into parts of your mind or subconscious. It may not even be the viewing experience you want, but it does give you different things each time you view it potentially, or showing it to other people, they might get different things out of it. And I think it's a strength of abstract media like this. Not abstract at all. Very concrete, objective question for you. If hypothetically, Dick Laurent and his leagues of henchmen were to go against Dennis Hopper's Frank Booth, okay? Let's say Dick Laurent is cruising and he has to make a pit stop over in Lumberton. Okay, he goes there and he has an altercation at the bar with Frank Booth. The confrontation of these two disgusting criminal alpha men. Okay, what happens? Who comes out on top in a confrontation between Mr. Eddie, Dick Laurent, and Frank Booth?
Mr. Eddie, Dick Laurent, and Frank Booth.
So there's a slash in there.
There's you see.
No, there's a slash. I just didn't pronounce it. I don't have to pronounce the hyphens or slashes in words.
Well, I think that the 2-in-1 duo, Mr. Eddie and Dick Laurent, would come out the victor very easily, actually.
Yeah.
Because the main difference between these different firecrackers, if you will, is that Frank Booth seems to be someone that at the very least seems very choreographed in his actions, if you will, especially when he has to take a deep breath of something. As long as he pisses off Mr. Eddie enough to get at him before he takes a whiff of his butt sniffer, I think that overall he'll have a
What?
good chance. He pulls it out of his ass, the tube.
Okay, to people who aren't paying attention to everything you say, that might be very confusing. Okay.
He pulls the tube out of his ass and
okay.
sniffs it.
So you're thinking that Mr. Eddie can like manipulate the fragile emotions of Frank Booth and manipulate him.
I think that they both get pissed off at each other.
They're both incredibly rash people.
I just think that one's faster.
Okay, that's fair. It's incredibly fair. And they both got equal numbers of henchmen, probably, right?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
I would say that maybe Dick Laurent has maybe only 2 or 3 bodyguards, but they're like more experienced, more capable. Like they seem
more focused as opposed towards the very wild gang.
Yeah, just kind of some friends of his that are a little wild and unruly.
Yeah.
But not like trained bodyguards.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that also. Huh. Which character do you think was written better? I mean, granted, one plays a much larger role in the narrative than the other, but
as far as a continuous presence to be antagonistic, Frank Booth.
Yeah.
In a structure of just a character in general that seems to be influence the story, I enjoy Mr. Eddie. So, but I think I lean more on the first result more than I do the second result.
I lean for Frank Booth as well. What do you think of the soundtrack of this movie?
It was music to my ears.
So it's Angelo Badalamenti for the instrumental.
Angelo Badalamenti, yes.
Do you like that Angelo Badalamenti score? Do you feel like it's the same as we've always heard or different?
I think that it still is. I think that he's got a signature to some of his sound overall. I think that from what I was hearing from Angelo Badalamenti, I was enjoying. And for the instances where everything was very, very quiet, there were even some points where I was thinking to myself, where's Angelo? Where are you right now, buddy?
And there's a lot of moments with music with lyrics from like different bands that punctuated a bit more than ones we've heard before.
Yes.
So we've had like, Julie Cruz singing at the scenes in Blue Velvet. We've had that. Or we've had, obviously, in Blue Velvet being sung. But this one has a lot of like non-diegetic music, a lot of just music added to the background.
Yes.
So it opens up with an intro song from David Bowie.
Yep. We all live inside a dream.
So the song is I'm Deranged by David Bowie. I think it's very effective for setting the mood.
I think that when I first popped in the DVD and thought I would go to a menu, instead David Bowie's voice popped up as we were driving down the road. I thought I had enough time to get a snack, but I was very incorrect. No, apparently the whooshing title decided to go on without me.
I don't even know what happened because I used the same DVD and I had a menu, so I don't know what happened.
Yeah, no, apparently you get one, I don't. So
That's fair. I think Bowie was a good choice. Not only is it interesting that he just got done working with Bowie on Fire Walk With Me a couple of years before, but now we also have the song in here. And Bowie around this time was doing his touring with Nine Inch Nails. And Nine Inch Nails are also part of the soundtrack, especially Trent Reznor. I think he had a couple credits on here beyond just the more vocal track. So yeah, Reznor and Bowie teaming up on this film, it really is a time capsule for me because I find that period to be really interesting for both of them. Reznor and Nine Inch Nails were right around the time of The Downward Spiral. So they were, performing probably some of the biggest songs in their career at the same time. That Bowie was entering his weird experimental industrial phase of, Heart's Filthy Lesson or Hello Space Boy. So I like it just as a fan of those two artists in this era.
Yes.
I like hearing this representation and seeing a movie that I think fills in some of the physicality of it. It never quite reaches the level of grungy grossness that like their music videos would at that time. But I do think it captures a similar spirit to that industrial music.
Okay.
Also appearing on a similar note is an artist that the Nine Inch Nails helped promote, which was Marilyn Manson.
Okay.
And so this one is a bit tough to talk about because last year, we're in 2022 now, last year in 2021, I believe is when it came out, that there were abuse allegations regarding Marilyn Manson. So at time of recording this, he hasn't actually, to my knowledge, been formally found guilty of any charges, but there have been concerns raised by several different people, I believe mostly women, about his actions. And that is very disheartening to hear that women went through those experiences and that Marilyn Manson might have been doing those actions. So in no way, when I say that I enjoyed his music, when I enjoyed his performance, in no way am I saying I promote the man and what he was doing if those allegations prove to be true.
Okay.
It's especially upsetting because Marilyn Manson's whole aesthetic was that he was trying to be an antichrist figure. I would like it if he wasn't doing actual evil things at the same time. So it's very, sad for me to hear as a fan of that kind of music and that movement. I will say on that note, just in terms of the artistry, I do think using Marilyn Manson was very good.
Okay.
The I put a spell on you moment with that scene where it was utilized, I thought that Manson's vocals worked well for that moment.
Okay.
And again, it's just another person that fits in this era where Nine Inch Nails would be also with Marilyn Manson as associated with Bowie. It's like they got the trifecta here. They also had Lou Reed. Lou Reed was doing the song when Alice first appears out of the car.
Okay.
And everything kind of feels like it slows down.
Yes.
And then Rammstein from the scene with the sex scene with everything in red. Very
Rammstein.
aggressive. Great. Like this is again where I'm gonna be clear, Marilyn Manson, those allegations are true. That's awful. Do not support. But in terms of like the music, I'm like, this is some of my favorite like industrial kind of like alternative heavy stuff of the 90s. And it's just located. I love the Lost Highway soundtrack. This is
Do you
one
own
of the
Lost Highway?
I believe all the Lynch soundtracks. I believe. I know I even have Inland Empire. But I think I have most of them. I know I for sure have Lost Highway, and I do listen to that sometimes. It's one of the soundtracks I like listening to the most because it is a nice mix of the instrumental with the actual like vocal tracks, and it's stuff I would listen to normally anyway because I like that kind of music.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of the soundtrack overall. I'm assuming that's more of a thing for me than it is for you based on your responses.
Based on my responses, because I'm not as familiar with these artists overall. So my overall interest comes with like each scene individually and just how it immerses me.
And side note also that Manson did make a cameo visually in one of the porno moments, that he was like one of the people on the screen.
Yep, it was either porno number 1 or porno number 2.
Yeah, and it's if you know what Manson looks like, it's fairly clear when he's on the screen. So, which is also where those allegations get to be more uncomfortable viewing this film again.
Yep.
Not only do you have an actor who is accused of killing his wife being the person who's implicit on suggesting someone kill their wife, you also have Manson who's been accused of like sexual abuse in the porno film, and it's just like, oh, this film is aged very badly in some regards, and very well for the visual effects, very well for the analog horror, but some of the casting, through no fault of anyone's, like Lynch would never have known, and I think Joanna Ray, was she involved in the casting again? I think so. Yeah, like they would never have known that this was all going on, so. Otherwise, in terms of the aesthetic, I guess the next biggest thing for me was the lighting. This movie is visually dark enough that I told you really should watch this at night.
Yes.
Do you stand by that suggestion for viewers who may not have seen this film yet and are for some reason still listening to us go on about it?
Not too much terribly. I think that there are effective moments during the night, but I don't find myself as immersed as some people may.
I feel like Lost Highway and Inland Empire are very much best viewed at night because of how visually dark things are.
Just don't do this one, Lost Highway, if you have any sort of sensitivity to flashing lights. Please do not, because that makes it even worse.
There are only a few scenes where it happens, but it's pretty intense when it does.
It's more intense than I've experienced with other David Lynch films.
Yes, for sure. Originally, David Lynch supposedly had wanted to shoot Lost Highway in black and white. But the idea was discarded because it was financially risky to do that. Like, that would be considered not very good to make money.
Yes.
So the studio was kind of pushing back against it. And he actually was willing to kind of go with the color, I guess, which, David Lynch being who he is, I'm interested. If he was that adamant about doing black and white, I'm surprised he relented. But anyway, nevertheless, the film was shot in varying levels of darkness and features few daylight scenes. Some sequences became so dark, it was difficult for viewers to see what was happening. According to one of the cinematographers, Deming, the thing I wanted to achieve was giving the feeling that anything could come out of the background and to leave a certain question about what you're looking at. The film is working under the surface while you're watching it. And apparently the film's darkness was intentionally not adjusted during post-production. They did not dim or increase or anything to do with the lighting after in post-production. The sets were just very dark.
They were just very dark, which is very impressive. And so I'd be scared in the hallway.
I'm just thinking of that part again with like the house where it like transitions into the red curtain in the background.
Yeah.
That's horrifying.
I'd be horrified on either side of the hallway.
So no, I find the lighting to be such that I definitely recommend this movie to be watched in the dark, because of, and I think you get more immersed into the the imagery that maybe otherwise in daylight you might not be able to see.
Yes.
So then that's also why I kept telling you to turn the volume up when I walked by you watching it. Because I think the music and the sound is good.
Like, I think it's good too. My ears are just like a little bit more sensitive than yours.
That's fair. I'm
Forgive
half deaf.
me.
Public reception. After a modest 3-week run, Lost Highway went on to make, reportedly, $3.7 million in North America.
And out of a budget of?
We're getting to that. So that was the majority of its box office success, was the $3.7 million. Wildly, at heart, it wasn't until May 2017 that Lost Highway was released in Russia.
Oh.
In 2017. 30, was it 30 years later? That's how math
Maybe.
works. That's how math works. And it grossed a little bit over $28,000.
Okay.
From what I can tell, the movie was not a success. I don't know if I could trust the budget information I was seeing online because I couldn't find a verified source. There's all just estimates. Mm-hmm. I was seeing pop up in a few different websites an estimate of a $15 million budget. If that is the case, it made less than $4 million on a $15 million budget, which would be, I would say, a definite flop.
Yeah.
I don't know where you draw the line between like a failure and a flop and like a catastrophe, but that's not good.
It's not good.
So I don't know.
I feel sad after I lose a few $100s.
So I don't know if this movie made even close to breaking even. I don't know if this would be considered a success by any stretch because it also wasn't critically very loved. So it wasn't commercially successful. It wasn't critically loved. It's not the film that really cements Lynch for a lot of people.
Yeah.
It just kind of exists.
It's here.
It's not as known of a failure as like Dune,
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, most critics initially dismissed the film as incoherent. They just said the film doesn't make any sense. That's most critics at the time.
Okay.
But since that time, it has attracted more of a cult following, as well as critical praise and scholarly interest.
Mm-hmm.
On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 62%, based on 45 critical reviews, with an average rating of 6.2 out of 10. Mm-hmm. The website's critical consensus reads, quote, marking a further escalation in David Lynch's surrealist style, Lost Highway is a foreboding mystery that arguably leads to a dead end, although it is signposted throughout with some of the director's most haunting images yet.
Man, they really wanted to get like those little road puns in there as the best they could.
I mean, it's a dead end if we think the dude dies from an electric chair at the end,
no,
so
I
we're not even really disagreeing with you.
Disagreeing at all.
On Metacritic, the film holds a score of 52 out of 100, based on 21 reviews, indicating mixed or average reviews. Roger Ebert. I made a whole little section for him this time.
I feel like at this point, like, we're just getting to know Roger Ebert very
Which I think is kind of neat. I think, like, I'm not someone who really follows Ebert's old opinions or, like, the website that's kind of carried on his legacy since. But I understand, like, in the 90s, he was, and even before, he was the film critic.
Yeah, but when will we get to hear about Siskel?
After
Was
Gene
Siskel alive
I'm
for any of the
literally
Lynch
about to read this. After Gene Siskel...
Hey, look, there's Gene Siskel.
And Roger Ebert gave the film a negative review on their show, David Lynch issued a new poster calling the thumbs down they gave it 2 more reasons to see Lost Highway.
Why are you leaning into David Lynch's voice there?
Because it was him.
Oh.
The poster. David Lynch put on the poster that the 2 thumbs down that Siskel and Ebert gave it is 2 more reasons to see Lost Highway.
My God, that is...
Asked for his opinion.
A fantastic sort of like... Is that like a spite spit happy face out of like an emotion?
Asked for his opinion.
I don't know what I said, but it sounds like it.
Asked for his opinion. Siskel said, I found it petty. There you go. There's your Gene Siskel content.
Delicious.
What do you think? Do you think the response of calling the 2 thumbs down 2 more reasons to see Lost Highway, do you see that is petty?
I don't. It seems at this point he's taking the criticism... I wouldn't say in stride, but he's
just kind of used to them hating on his stuff, right?
He's just kind of like skipping along. He's just like, this is just the status quo at the moment, so let's go.
So I took a lot of quotes out of Ebert's review, and I just kind of want to run some of them by you with some questions. So I did look a little bit more in depth on this particular review, just because I was curious.
Why?
Because we've talked about Ebert's opinions being rather contrary to the public discourse around Blue Velvet or Fire Walk with Me, like... calling his movies, like, unethical a lot of times. So I was just curious. Let's look at Lost Highway, one of the dirtiest, grossest ones, right? Mm-hmm. And let's see what he has to say and run it by you.
Okay.
So, according to Ebert, quote, David Lynch's Lost Highway is like kissing a mirror. You like what you see, but it's not much fun and kind of cold. It's a shaggy ghost story, an exercise in style, a film made with a certain breezy contempt for audiences. I've seen it twice, hoping to make sense of it. There is no sense to be made of it. To try is to miss the point. So there's a lot to unpack, right? Just little things here. So first thing, compares to kissing a mirror. You like what you see. It's not much fun, and it's kind of cold. Thoughts?
It is...
I mean, it's obviously subjective whether you like what you see or not.
It's something that which just does... It feels like one of those like insults that you kind of keep in your back pocket, if you will. It's nothing too unique other than the fact that we do have a mild.
We do have mirrors. I do think it is a cold movie. I agree with that.
I think I agree with the coldness of the movie, but
fun is debatable. I don't think the main feeling I'm having is fun, but that's also not what the movie is about, is this feeling of fun.
Maybe it was just fun for him.
It's not the feeling of like watching Ice Age when you're like 9 years old.
Maybe
you know?
it is.
Maybe it is.
Maybe it is. It's one of those recommendations, you know, after you see Lost Highway, that's when it recommends Ice Age, continental shift.
But the idea that it's a mirror, I do think it reflects back at you maybe some of your subconscious. You know, maybe it's a mirror in some ways. I don't think it's the way he means it.
I don't think that he was putting that much thought into it.
I don't think he's thinking
being
the same thing.
eloquent with his words.
Shaggy ghost story. I like the idea of Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. No, I like the idea of calling it a ghost story. I think it's kind of an interesting way to word it. It is in a way a ghost story.
Yes,
I'm fair. I think that's an interesting way to put it.
It's got haunting.
It is an exercise in style. I agree. The big one here, he says, you know, it's a film made with a certain breezy contempt for audiences. Do you think this movie hates audiences? Do you think David Lynch made this with a sort of derisive stiff upper lip?
I think that the most stiff upper lip I can imagine, like David Lynch going actively into, is something like on the production end to just say, "Hey, can I do this?" As we've like already.
But that's not to the audiences. That's to the production.
Audience.
Yeah, it's to the studio.
It's to the production studio. Whether or not some people feel that disrespect will also stretch out otherwise, that's like.
Yeah, I don't think this movie hates audiences.
I don't think that's. What does it feel like whenever it like hates an audience?
I think what it oftentimes is shorthand for, because obviously movies don't feel anything, they're movies, but the idea that the filmmakers are talking down to their audience and kind of like rolling their eyes or making fun of them, or like they're almost treating the audience with a sense of flippancy, or like they're purposefully making it some way because they're like cynically thinking that they'll love that. A lot of like really irony poisoning, I think, is where it comes from a lot of times, where it's like we're gonna dish them out pain and they're gonna like it. But I don't get that sense out of this. I think Lynch makes movies for himself.
Yeah.
And I mean that in all the positive and negative connotations. I think that Lynch makes something because it's an idea that moves him, and if people like it, great. I don't really think he's making it against people. I don't think he's motivated that way.
I'm very interested if that tone carries into The Return.
Yeah.
I'm very interested on how far this goes.
What do you mean?
You say that David Lynch is, in the present tense, you know, making things for himself.
Yeah. I think he made The Return for himself, probably. Put a pin in that. And he says there's no point to the movie. And if you try to look for a point, it's to miss the point. Like, there's no point to find. You cannot make sense out of it.
Well, our podcast is useless. We should just throw this away.
We've spent like close to 3 hours probably by this point, right? Just talking about nothing.
We're talking about nothing.
We
waste our time.
He calls the movie an empty stylistic facade, and he writes that this movie is about design, not cinema. He refers to the scene where Patricia Arquette is, quote, forced to disrobe at gunpoint and stand naked in a room full of strange men, an echo of Isabella Rossellini's humiliation in Lynch's Blue Velvet, which prompts Ebert to ask, does this scene have a point? Does any scene in this movie have a point? Lost Highway plays like a director's idea book, in which isolated scenes and notions are jotted down for possible future use. Instead of massaging them into a finished screenplay, Lynch and collaborator Barry Gifford seem to have filmed the notes. Is the joke on us? Is it our error to try to make sense of the film, to try to figure out why protagonists change in midstream? Let's say it is. Let's say the movie should be taken exactly as it is with no questions asked. Then what do we have? We still have just the notes for isolated scenes. There's no emotional or artistic thread running through the material to make it seem necessary that it's all in the same film together. Big quote, big meaty quote thrown at you there. But yeah, this idea that these scenes do not have any point. They're just random scenes thrown together from Lynch's idea book. And that a joke is being almost played on us to try to make sense of them and put them together because there's been no effort taken to make it feel like one screenplay.
Why should it take that effort to make it into one screenplay? Why does it have to be in which we have to throw in this idea of like how the perspective is supposed to just work out in general? Like we're just supposed to throw it to the side and just accept it. I think that we should be asking questions on why is it more wild like this? Why does it go and deviate from the norm? Instead of just accepting that it just does. So when you do throw it into that realm of sight, sure. But I think that that also is being very insulting to the act of filmmaking in general.
I feel like it's very limited. Like, it's kind of limiting films to follow very predictable plot beats and follow a standard structure. And the moment a film deviates from that structure, it feels purely random. I don't think watching it subjectively, I don't think it feels purely random.
I feel that it is not chronologically cohesive, but I also don't think that that has to be inherently bad.
Does a film have to be, to still be effective?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think
Memento is like a big film people kind of put out for.
Yeah. I still haven't seen Memento yet, so no spoilers, but I've heard loosely, yes.
Yeah.
Quote, Lynch is such a talented director. Why does he pull the rug out from under his own films? I have nothing against the movies of mystery, deception, and puzzlement. It's just that I'd like to think the director has an idea, a purpose, an overview, beyond the arbitrary manipulation of plot elements. He knows how to put effective images on the screen, and how to use a soundtrack to create mood. But at the end of the film, our hand closes on empty air. So, kind of this feeling that he has that Lynch is talented, and he knows how to create feelings of mystery and tension, but it just doesn't go anywhere. He likes to believe that Lynch has an idea or purpose that's beyond just manipulating some story elements, but it's not coming together for Ebert here.
I feel like Ebert is the type of person that if the Lego set doesn't make the model, then what's the point? Like, there's no, like, playfulness that you can do to work around it or just have, a bucket of random Legos and just put it together and make something fun. I think that it has to, like, make something to be a good Lego, or in this case, a good film in the end. Like, maybe I'm bashing Ebert very badly.
No, this is very entertaining. This is very entertaining. And I'm not, I don't feel as passionately, but I do think Ebert's criticism is so interesting because it's so detached from why I enjoy this film. Like, I'm someone who would probably give this like a solid 8 out of 10 kind of situation. Maybe 7.5 out of 10 depending on the day. But I quite enjoy it because of the atmosphere, because of the feelings, because of some of the weird questions and ideas it makes me wonder about, the mystery. I don't necessarily come to it feeling like it is pointless or nonsense. I have seen films that are way weirder or more experimental from this. I've seen things that David Lynch has made that make less sense than this.
I think that whenever it comes to art, you've got to at least play around with the materials just to, at the very least, work in a medium and feel very fulfilled from it.
I'm not opposed to the idea of criticizing a film for feeling like it's asking questions and then empty.
Yes.
I think that's a fair criticism sometimes. I just don't think that Lost Highway is doing that.
I don't think it's doing that either.
I think that Lost Highway has substance.
I think that just it's strange that it's just pointing out towards David Lynch on constantly doing this. And I'm thinking to myself, even when I see David Lynch at his worst, in my opinion, because I really don't like Blue Velvet as much as a lot of other people do. I still do think that he's at the very least playing with the medium enough that it's something that I'm going to go in and have a different experience with, and I think that that's valuable.
I agree with Ebert's take a little bit more on Wild at Heart than I did with The Lost Highway.
Yeah.
I wasn't fully on board with Ebert's take on Wild at Heart, but at least there I thought the criticisms, criticizing the Wizard of Oz element as being kind of holding it back, I could see it, and I kind of agree with it.
Six String Samurai did better.
Fair enough. In terms of awards, Lost Highway won no major awards, just won nothing. It wasn't nominated for hardly anything either. I tried to look and there's just not much on there.
Okay.
At the 1997 Stinkers Bad Movie Awards, Lost Highway was nominated for Worst Picture and Worst Director.
Oh.
But it lost in both categories to Batman and Robin.
There's a lot of things that would lose to Batman and Robin for multiple reasons.
It was nominated for the Worst Picture and Worst Director, but that's about it. It's not much. There's some local smaller festivals that did it, but not big giant, big deals.
Yeah.
Compared to Lynch, who had previously gotten nominations pretty high up there for director, or Cannes would recognize them with the Palme d'Or for Wild at Heart. This was definitely, again, didn't make hardly any money, probably lost money. It didn't get public. It was only up for 3 weeks in the theaters, and barely anyone paid attention to it.
I'm just thinking to myself, in a place that sort of celebrates the worst of the worst, what sort of atmosphere? Because this doesn't feel like it'd be in a room, the Room atmosphere, Tommy Wiseau style atmosphere. So I'm just wondering how a bad viewing of this would go. Bad being walking in, knowing it's going to be bad, reviewing that badness. Because usually whenever I try to see a bad movie, I'm going in entertained, having some quips. And
You're
just
looking for a
fun.
so bad it's good.
Yes.
Which this film doesn't, I don't think, offer that. I think if you think this movie's bad, you wouldn't think it's entertaining. You would just say it's empty, it's vapid, it's drawn out, it's pointless, it's frustrating. I think it'd be all negative emotions.
Yeah.
I don't think you could find a lot of so bad it's good enjoyment out of here, unless it's in the acting. Maybe you think that Robert Loggia, his Mr. Eddie, is so over the top that it's kind of funny, but you think it's bad.
Okay.
That's one thing I kind of sympathize with going back to Wild at Heart for a moment. The actor who plays the mom, Laura Dern's mom, I could see someone saying that's a bad performance because it's so, overdone. You know what I mean? When she's, doing the snarling with her hand and she's, smearing all the red, I could see someone laughing at it thinking it's bad.
Yes.
I could see it.
Yes.
I think this movie's a little different than Wild at Heart, though. It's not nearly as campy or cheesy or silly.
Yes.
I don't know. Any hoozles. Entertainment Weekly ranked this film as the 23rd scariest movie of all time at some point. For how many horror movies there are, 23 actually feels pretty charitable. You know? At the grand scheme of things, sure, 23. It's not bad. Because it wasn't really that successful or that huge, it didn't have a very broad appeal at first. I was reading about how it took it was a little over a decade for the first DVD release to really come out for this movie.
Yes.
Even though in 97 DVD technology was not totally foreign and it would be coming soon. But nope, it just wasn't a lot of demand for the movie, so they didn't release it again for a while. But it has developed a bit of a cult following. But it's not to the levels of Fire Walk With Me's cult following, where it revitalized passion for it.
Yeah.
I think most times that Lost Highway's brought up, it's in the context of David Lynch fans, and pretty much David Lynch fans.
Okay.
Where it has some kind of middling appeal. Some people, I've talked to a friend who's really big into Lynch, and he says he gets nothing out of this one.
Yes.
Whereas I know that for myself, I do get quite a bit out of this one. Random side note, by the way, in 2003, the Austrian composers Olga Neuwirth and Elfriede Jelinek turned the film into an opera, basing it on David Lynch's and Barry Gifford's screenplay. Reportedly, the first act of the opera is spoken word, and the second act is sung. This is all reportedly. I was not there in 2003 to listen to the Austrian opera.
How dare you?
I think that's kind of cool that they do make the two different parts different formats.
No, but I think that sounds fun, but I'm not familiar with Austrian opera to know whether or not that's the norm or
I think
different.
It's weird to know that that's a thing. This also sparked a lot of curiosity in me because when I watched Lost Highway for the first time years ago, and even when I think about it now, the thing it most reminds me of is Silent Hill.
Okay.
And I'm not a huge Silent Hill fan. To be clear, these games scared me as a child. Silent Hill, if you don't know, is a horror video game series. Started with the PlayStation 1, peaked in popularity at the PS2. Silent Hill 2 is considered by a lot of people to be one of the best video games ever made.
Yes.
Silent Hill 3 has enjoyed a little bit less of success popularity-wise. Still has a lot of diehard fans. The first 3 Silent Hills, and a little bit with Silent Hill 4, kind of being considered a golden age of video game horror, and just horror in general.
Yes.
Leaning a lot into psychological, sexual, even spiritual horror with occultist sort of themes. And while I don't play these games, because again, they give me nightmares, even now as an adult, they bother me. As a kid, they horrified me. I have a lot of respect for Silent Hill. I have a lot of respect for what they're doing in those games. And I feel like this, of all the Lynch movies, of all the Lynch things, this is one of the most Silent Hill-like for me. The idea of, and again, if you know the plots of Silent Hill, especially Silent Hill 2, the idea of this guy who commits an act of violence, represses that guilt and buries it into his subconscious, and is then haunted by ghastly figures along an ensuing, winding storyline.
Yes.
Just add some, body horror monsters, and you've basically got a Silent Hill template. And the use of the analog horror, the use of the darkness and the shadows, and the industrial music, It's very this has to be an influence. From what I could tell, though, I tried researching and I could not find any outright confirmation.
Okay.
I know that Team Silent, the people who made the first Silent Hill games, as they're kind of known in the community, I know that those people were influenced by David Lynch. I know David Lynch is an influence on Silent Hill.
Yes.
There are things in Silent Hill that even call back to Twin Peaks and stuff. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if Lost Highway specifically is ever said to be a reference by them.
Okay.
I was looking up some articles. Aaron Plouffe, from an article 2 years ago that was released on the website 25 Years Later, which in part is a Twin Peaks fan site, from what I understand. Very, very popular and very, very successful website. They were comparing how this game is, Silent Hill 2 is very similar to Lost Highway in their article. So I'm not alone in thinking that. I'm not crazy. And then GoombaStomp.com.
There we go.
Bringing it back now, y'all.
We found
GoombaStomp.com had an article that does a similar thing. But again, no confirmation.
Okay.
Yes, I cited GoombaStomp at the beginning just to tell you that they wrote an article that confirms that suggested something I also thought without confirming it. It's not even really a research. It's just someone else said it too.
Someone else said it too. What more research do you need other than confirmation bias?
So now that our biases have been confirmed, what would you say have been any changes in your mind as we've talked about the movie? Has anything occurred to you that you didn't think of when we first started? This has been a long trek of a podcast.
It's been a long trek of the podcast. I think that for more than anything, I think you and I had a fun time exploring the potential dream realm of this film. So I'm glad that yet again I can lead you to my side of thought.
I thought you were generally very insightful. I would say if we were looking for the MVP out of the two of us, I think you were the MVP this episode.
I wonder MVP.
I have been the MVP for every single episode up to this point.
That's a lie.
For 49 straight episodes, I have been the MVP.
Excuse me.
MVP, not MPP. MVP.
No, you're the MPP. I'm the MVP.
I have decided to crown you for the 50th episode of our podcast. You are the MVP of the Lost Highway. Your reward is Garmin Bosia, Pain and Suffering.
Oh, no.
Congratulations.
I'm the best.
You have an applause track on your soundboard there?
Erase it, Lucy.
No!
This is the end of the podcast.
It's erased
50
from the
is a
record.
good number. You like your even numbers, don't you, Kalil?
Happy 50th anniversary of the pod.
Happy 50th anniversary.
Happy 50 episode.
50 episode.
How many episodes do you think we're going to have for this podcast? What's the number we stop at?
I fear the number.
I think we get to at least 100, right?
You want to go to 100? Okay.
Okay, well, you got to think about it this way. We got 18 for the return, right? So minimum of 18 on the return.
Minimum 18.
You're going to factor in a look back at some point with that. At least
probably.
one or two, right?
At least one or two, yeah.
So let's just say 20. Let's say 20.
Firm 20.
Okay.
You can't take 19,
We've
you need
got
20.
both Mark Frost books, The Secret History of Twin Peaks and The Final Dossier. That's going to add up. I don't know what the number's going to be, but that's going to be a lot.
It's only just going to be 2 more pods. That's okay.
That's going to be at least probably 6?
6?
7, 8? You don't know how dense those books are.
I don't know how dense those books will be,
With
but
I
don't know how dense we will speak on books. Books is a fun new territory.
Anyway, point is, we got some episodes ahead. I can see us going to 100 at least.
200 we go.
1,000. The never-ending podcast.
I'll drop it at 1,000. For our maximum, guys, 1,000 episode podcast.
And let it be our goal to never innovate, because we've already perfected the formula of ending every pod with the wonderful and strange question of the week. I have 3 of them this time. One of them.
Hey, okay, the trademark question of the week, Kalil, I want to remind you.
I have 3 question of the week. I have 3 questions. First question, how has Lost Highway shaped your understanding of David Lynch as an artist?
It hasn't. Next question.
Really?
It hasn't really, no, honestly. If you really want more words than this...
Make it a full tweet.
It is something in which, nothing has really changed in my perspective. I've heard the same things about David Lynch initially. I feel that overall, the tones of the film are fun to explore things, but the dreamlike quality is very notable, and we still have elements of David Lynch pop through, but not to any point of annoyance this time for me, such as red curtains, blue light, as well as red light. So, at this point, it seems like David Lynch is David Lynch.
Wow. What a realization.
Mm-hmm.
David Lynch was the friends we made along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Between Fred and Pete's 2 sections in the film, kind of splitting it.
Fred.
I said Fred.
Fred.
Oh, you're picking.
No.
Oh,
Keep
you're
going.
picking.
Keep,
oh, sorry.
Keep talking.
Which one did you like more?
Fred.
So even though you found the first like 20-ish minutes boring,
I think I think Pizza's more entertaining. I just prefer Fred's.
Okay.
Like
not for entertainment, but for the art.
Sure, let's go for that phrasing. No, I think that it makes things very interesting.
Okay.
Dependent on your reviewing, if you will. It's interesting, it's intriguing, and I think that that's the biggest benefit to the film, not just the entertainment alone.
Okay. And then third, because we're just zooming through these.
Woo!
Third one, since this was also written by Barry Gifford, how do you think this is similar to Wild at Heart? And along with that, can you tell that Barry Gifford was involved in the writing?
I wasn't really considering Barry Gifford in the first place.
Yeah.
Just because I wasn't thinking towards Tip in general.
I'm just saying, now that you know that the guy who wrote Wild at Heart was involved, does it feel like any different?
It's hard to say, because I think that, if I'm not mistaken, we had mentioned that the tone of Wild at Heart, the book, and Wild at Heart, what happened with David Lynch, are different enough that looking into this is something of a different tone, very similar to something of a different tone. No, it's a different tone. It didn't feel like it was like a trademark Barry Gifford sort of moment. But then again, I don't know how much Barry Gifford was in it in Wild at Heart. So
it is tough,
one's dramatic and romantic, and one is dreary and horrifying. And I think that I'm leaning more on the Lynch humor of it all.
Yeah, I don't really know if I feel any difference, and it's also hard because Lynch works with the writers sometimes. Like, we know Fire Walk With Me wasn't just written by Lynch. So there are other writers that are oftentimes involved in his work, and
yes,
Lynch as the director has such a strong stylistic flourish that, like, I don't think it was Barry Gifford's idea to submerge scenes in red or have blue light. I feel like that's Lynch just going by trends here. But it's hard to really pinpoint, like, oh, that's a David Lynch line right there. That's a Barry Gifford line. Like the line that you really liked in the movie where Loggia turns to Pete, where Dick Laurent turns to Pete and he says, like, you like porno? Make you hard? And he like gives it like once again.
He wasn't stuttering. He was very
confident.
Make you hard.
So you like that line? Was that a Lynch line or was that a Barry Gifford line?
I think it was Lynch.
I mean, like, yeah, right? Like, it could be
Lynch.
So it's kind of hard.
I don't know Barry Gifford enough to know what his lines are.
Yeah, like the problem is I don't know what's not Lynch to like isolate and say this is the Gifford part.
I don't think we could get a straight answer either. So
no, but speaking of straight, the straight story is our next thing we're probably going to look at, or it's going to be the Access Guide to Twin Peaks.
Whichever one we end up finishing first.
It's a Schrodinger's cat kind of thing.
No, it's not.
When
I don't think
right
I
now,
don't. Nope.
It could be dead or alive.
It could be dead or alive.
Because the box has not been opened.
Speaking of dead or alive, just because it's an anniversary episode, maybe, I don't know, because 50 is an anniversary of something.
Who killed Mark Frost? No. I can do one better. Who put Josie in the doorknob?
Who killed Laura Palmer?
Who's Laura Palmer? Who's Laura Palmer? I'm gonna stick by the answer if I still don't know who killed Laura Palmer, right? We got that one on record.